Okay. So, first things first, welcome all to this, our third and last webinar for this mini-series on our extended bodies ourselves. Thank you again for your time. And for those of you who already attended last week and or the week before, thank you for seeing us through. It's been great to share the fruit of our efforts with you and to feel like the questions that we raised really sort of raised some interest in the community. Yeah, it's been lovely. If you missed previous sessions and wish to catch up, we're happy to inform you that you can find recordings of them on the YouTube channel for my research team at University of Lorraine. That's called IDEA, Interdisciplinarity in English Studies. So if you just type in that name, you should be able to find it. The links are available on the website of our project, Humanities After Humans. Otherwise, if you just search for our extended bodies ourselves, the video should come up. Right, and as usual, a little bit of housekeeping. We're planning again to have the Q&A session at the end of the panel. So you can write your questions directly in the chat and we'll ask them for you. Or you can simply raise your hand at the end to ask a question yourself. If you can't find the little icon, activate your, put your camera on and show yourself and actually raise your hand, and we'll see you doing that. Right. So today's panel is quite special as it brings together a paper from a human scientist and two presentations, not by non-human scientists, because we haven't come that far yet, but two papers by people who don't work in humanities, but in the world of engineering itself. So insofar as our project aimed to contribute to a dialogue between people who think and write about tech and people who actually build machines and produce tech, this is sort of where we try and see whether some of our ambitions can be met. Can any of what we're talking about make its way into the world of tech, or is it all, disappointingly uncommunicable, and are we just, speaking in the desert, so to say? This will also be a bit of an extended session, as we'll have the pleasure of welcoming two engineers, research engineers from the BISCUIT team at Supélec to take part in a roundtable and virtual conference drinks after the panel. So, yeah. So a lot of the work that we've heard so far dealt with the way tech extends our bodies and impacts them in return. How machines emulate us and interact with us through our corporeal envelope, thereby troubling our sense of ourselves as human. And the three papers we'll be hearing today explore what we might have considered as the sort of last fronts on which we could still reliably distinguish between humans and machines. That is the ability to think and teach ourselves things, the faculty to feel and to create art, and the ability to participate in one's own growth and evolution. And so without further ado, I'll let my co-host, Sarah, introduce our first speaker for today.
Hi everyone, so I'm going to introduce Pauline, who is currently completing her PhD dissertation at the Sorbonne, at Sorbonne University, in Media and Communication Studies. Her PhD is entitled The Digital Landscapes of Google, From Images Environment to Perceptive Coexistences. She's taught at the major communication school, the CELSA, for 6 years in media, marketing, and intercultural communication departments. She's also been teaching at l'École des Mines d'Alès for a master's degree in partnership with the CELSA between digital communication and IT engineering. And more recently, she's been a guest lecturer in the MA and MFA Transdisciplinary New Media program at Paris College of Art. Her research specializes, her research specialties lie at the intersection of media studies, that is social and techno-semiotics and critical theory, visual studies, that is sensory and material term theories, and anthropology, so ecological approaches, environmental theory. In her research, she looks at imagery services such as Google Maps and Google Street View and the singularity and plasticity of such devices, and has published on this research in several academic outlets. Aside from her PhD, she's part of different art collectives and writing projects and an editorial member of the art journal Librarioli. So Pauline, whenever you want.
Okay. So let's go. Hi, everyone. Can you, okay, it's not working.
It is working. Yeah.
Working. Okay, do you have it? Okay, full screen. So hi everyone, thank you, Sarah, Diane, Estelle, for welcoming me here in the context of this seminary. I'm really pleased to be able to open this dialogue. So today I will present you an ongoing work called The Multiple Eye of the Digital Image, Aesthetic as a Metric in Google's project Creatism. That is part of my PhD, but is as well a new project I opened today because I can strictly feel that it needs an interdisciplinary dialogue to become something in a way. So this is a landscape picture. This is a landscape picture with a weird cloud and a weird cliff on the left. This is a landscape picture with a weird cloud and mountain on the left in the background, and a weird and blurry hill and blurred hill on the right. This is a landscape picture with a cut mountain and bank edge on the left, and a blurry, sorry, there is a problem with with a blurry mountain on the right. Okay, it's not working. Creatism, I'm really sorry, there is a problem with the PowerPoint, with the presentation, with the keynote. Whatever. So these pictures are part of the project Creatism, because in July 2017, Google announced they were using AI to create stunning landscape photos using Google Street View imagery. Apparently, the AI photo editor tricks even professional photographers. This deep learning photographer system, called Creatism, is related to a blog where the Google team compiled a gallery of photos created by the AI and to a scientific paper, Creatism, a deep learning photographer capable of creating professional work, published by Wei Fang and Meng Zhang, both members of machine perception team at Google. This paper was published on the website archive of Cornell University in July 11, 2017. What is claimed to be at the core of the project is to explore how machine learning can learn subjective concepts such as aesthetic value and generate probable landscape pictures. From my own disciplinary background in media studies, I offer to discuss the idea of aesthetics as developed and operated by the machine perception team in the project Creatism. Considering the complexity of the concept of aesthetics, my intent today is definitely not to discuss the concept of aesthetic in a philosophical way, rather than discussing the material condition of the conceptualization of this project. It means all the background on the conceptual background on which it's constituted. My reading of the paper, the Creatism paper published by the two engineers, is completely blind of any mathematical knowledge. I have absolutely no knowledge on deep learning. So I therefore apologize for any misinterpretation or approximation in the formal description of the project. Anyway, my hypothesis is that without sharing a mathematical language, part of the formulation of the deep learning problem could benefit from a human sciences approach. I will present Creatism as a technical approach of aesthetics. Then I will consider this project from the other side, going to different aspects of the context of experimentation and values that are implied. Last part is the proposal of open perspectives about meeting halfway the deep learning language from my human sciences language. The different steps will lead to open new perspective and consider the specific subjectivities, either human and non-human, these AI-produced images imply. So here we go. Okay, so this is the paper. This is a picture of the paper, Criticism, a Deep Learning Photographer Capable of Creating Professional Work. I've tried to read this like through my human sciences list. And here is what I've read about aesthetics in this paper. The success of a photograph is measured by its aesthetic value, a very subjective concept. A deep learning, I'm sorry, I'm obliged to do it like that, unless I can't read the text, if it's fine for you. A deep learning system for artistic content creation in our system, we break down aesthetics into multiple aspects. Each can be learned individually from a shared data set of professional examples. What is said also about aesthetic is that, however, a good photo should be not only technically solid, but also aesthetically pleasing. Somewhere else in the text is said, aesthetics is vague and subjective, a metric hard to define scientifically. Then evaluation on aesthetics is very subjective. Then assume there exists a universal aesthetics metric. This is all that is about aesthetic. There is no other conceptual definition of aesthetics in that paper. So that leads to the second part. Like, obviously, this paper is not about discussing aesthetics, but it's important to see that there is like an under conceptualization of the idea of aesthetics. But their issues is how to generate a pro-level photograph. And like, from what this is what I understood from the issues of generating a pro-level photograph in deep learning. So first, this project takes place in the context of camera hardware and computational photography. Like a modern cell phone can take technically solid photographs in terms of exposure, level, noise level, pixel sharpness, color accuracy. We know that today there is a high important context of competitivity between the different brands, like for example, Apple and Google on like building the best camera for cell phone, because there is a huge market about that. So let's go back to what they say. Like, however, a good photo should be not only technically solid, but also aesthetically pleasing. We can see in this sentence that there is like this idea that is coming from Kant, that there is an idea of like being pleaseful, of being pleased while experimenting aesthetic experience. But the core idea of the project is to use different aesthetic predictions to capture different aspects in aesthetics, saturation, detail level, composition. So what it means is that like suddenly aesthetics is not like this general concept, but becomes layers of an images, like technical operation that constitutes a picture. So aesthetics is not treated as a single quantity. Suddenly aesthetics become quantity, not a quality of experience, for example, and a combination of different aspects, and is coupled with an image operation that can modify these aspects. Their general project is part based on what they call in deep learning, generative adversarial networks. I obviously don't understand part of it, but what is interesting in this technique is that it uses half a discriminative process and a generative process simultaneously to train the machine, which means that they can, on the side, like learn different aspects of the aesthetics and apply it to the image operation to improve each aspect operation, and also use discriminative aspects to compare the images between them to improve the quality of the picture, to aim this professional quality of photo with no additional labels or before-after image pairs brought by an external data set. And then the paper raised this question: what is the ultimate metric for the highest aesthetic standard human can define? And then they say, a generated photo is at professional level if professionals in a blind test cannot tell whether it is created by an algorithm or by another professional. In our work, we use professional photographers to represent best experts in photography. The standard can be further raised by replacing that word with, say, top 10 masters photographers in the world. We work with professional photographers to define 4 levels of aesthetic quality, with the top level pro. In experiment, we ask professionals to rate a random mixture of photos in different levels, with photos taken by a robot mixed in. For robot creation with high prediction score, about 40% ratings, we received our semi-pro to pro level. While we didn't beat our Turing test consistently, we show that creating photos using machine learning at professional quality is made possible. Here, like, obviously, like reading this, it's for us, like we discover as a part of like all the experiments being led, but I really would like to stop on this idea of like the standard could be the top 10 master photographers in the world. Like, I honestly don't have this scale in my knowledge, and like there is no bibliographic or source about that, and it's like highly, like it's it's impossible to define what are the 10 masters photographers in the world. I will come back after in the second part, like on what references they build up this idea of like top 10 masters, but also it shows an ideology of something that would be like a master in a discipline, that there will be like a top level that is like the desirable level of aesthetics, that is the desirable level for a photographer, that is a reach to aim. Here is how the problem is formulated. So obviously I'm not gonna try to read it, like read the mathematical formula. But what I'm interested in that part is the different unity that are used to build up the formula. So like as a start, like assume there exists a universal aesthetic metric. So this is the basis. So from the basis, they consider that we could quantify and define aesthetic without even giving a definition of what it could be. But therefore, it starts with that. Then there is the second term, that is P, the best photograph. And so this project aims to learn different aspects of aesthetics and applies images operation to improve each aspect in a semi-orthogonal way. Which means that the photograph is based on a layer of operation that will progressively build up that image that we saw at the beginning. P environment is simulated by a collection of panorama images from Google Street View, mostly collected on foot instead of by vehicle. So P, the best photograph aimed by the deep learning process, is based on this idea of it has an environment. And this is something I will come back on after, of like what could be considered as the environment of images. We can see here that it has a double meaning. First, it's the environment of P, also the environment of the robot, and environment as like a series of panoramas that are taken from Google Street View. And to define the universal aesthetic metric with the example, number of images needs to grow exponentially to cover more aspects. So how to have a quantity of pro-level natural images to make the machine learn and progress to develop this high quality photography. And so like one of the solutions they might have would be to balance the photos using photo pairs of before and after post-processing by photographers. But the problem is that as we are trying to reach a high quality, high pro-level photography, there is a lack of data sets. Like we don't have enough professional photography to train the machine as it should be. So the solution they found is like to generate by the machine the before and after, just changing the parameters of like saturation, noise level to train the machine itself without having to find the data in a general collection of pictures. One of the specificity of this project is based on this idea of a dramatic mask, which is pretty interesting because it's like the last operation they build up And it's a novel image operation to enhance dramatic lighting. That obviously makes me think of all the spectatorship paradigm, and especially like this idea of like, should a pictoriality of like, how should we dramatize, and how do we set up the image to build up the spectatorship. So here are the results, like, so the before and after images produced by Creatism. So you can see here the panorama first that are coming from the Google Street View, and then the result at the end with the different notation by what was predicted and how the professional rated the images at the end. So now I will try to look at this project from the other side, very briefly, as I see the time is going. So that was what I said before about the aesthetics, all the different definitions. I said I won't define aesthetics, but I thought it was a bit important to generate like a very brief and non-exhaustive panorama of contemporary controversies about aesthetic. Actually, in philosophy, there is a huge debate about aesthetic, of like, should it be still used, and is it like still an accurate concept? And so we have different tendencies. On one side, we have like anti-aesthetic tendencies, considering aesthetic as dead. So based on a critique of Kant and based on a critiques of Enlightenment, we have a neo-Hegelianism movement opposing aesthetics to art philosophy. Also, there is this this question of the double failure of aesthetics based on critics of aesthetics not considering enough the question of perception, which phenomenology and cognitive science do, and also like a critique of aesthetics as something very distant to artistic activities, contrary to art philosophy and theory. As well, aesthetic and artistry might be limited by the centrality of the image, and visual anthropology today considers artistic productions through the relation we build up with them, and obviously have a wider approach of image, considering the question of power. And part of that, like, we've got the material turn inspired by Marxism, and like maybe the ecological turn. Another like new thing happening about aesthetics is a possible plasticity turn, like especially with Catherine Malabou, if we want, reconsidering aesthetic from the idea of epigenetic in relation to deep learning and neural network studies. Obviously, all these questions raise as well the problematic of the value, like economical, moral, and artistic, especially in the context of capitalism. This is very brief and not really precise, but it's just to say that we can't reduce easily aesthetic to any idea of quantity, or either like to any universal measure, as it's like we can't even find a proper common definition of it in the human sciences. About the idea of like a pro-level picture, pro as a value. In the paper, like it's the paper, the paper, like, is speaking of the workflow of a landscape photographer, speaks of standards, so the top 10 masters, the idea of a professional photographers. What they say is that they work with 6 professionals for the evaluation, and how they selected them, it was through their degrees, like a bachelor degree in photography plus 2 years experience. They collected thumbnails from a website, actually, that is called 500pixel.com. And now I will show you this website. Well, what I meant about the professional, it means that the experience is only based on 6 photographers. And second, that it was just based on the idea of having a degree in photography. This website was created in 2009 by 2 IT engineers from Canada, and has been bought 2 years ago by a Chinese company. Also, as well, it has a partnership with Google on Chromecast that allows to screen the picture from a website to TV or any other devices. This website is dedicated to pro-level photographers, but not only. The thing is that we have no real definition of what is the pro-level or how they are recruited and all the economical model behind. Their study was based on the landscape photographies present in this website. So here we have a preview of what kind of picture we can find of this on this website. As well, this is what is popular today on this website, questioning as well, like what do we decide as a decent photography, as a professional photography, and as like a canon aesthetic of today on which we would base like a machine learning development. Like as I have lack of time, I won't develop the different description of the scoring for the images, but I would like to show you like two different aspects of this picture. First, like if we are going further, like there was this aspect of like what is to be like a professional in photography. Obviously, these don't take account of like the other websites that exist today. And obviously we see that there is like a certain culture of what is imagery and what should be a technical photography today. As well, the idea of landscape is highly critical today. First, it brings the idea of wilderness, and I don't have time, sorry, to read these two except, but as William Cronon defended for years, says like something such as Yosemite is nothing but natural. So all those images are built up on some artificiality of a constructed experiment of nature and of sensoriality. I will read the one of Natalie Hales, saying that the problem with constructing the situation in these terms, bad simulation, good nature, is that it relies on distinctions that quickly become problematic. What counts as natural? Can we consider Yosemite Natural Park an embodiment of nature? If so, then nature is synonymous with human intervention, for only human intervention has kept Yosemite as a nature preserve. Ask for a definition of wilderness in a Reinventing Nature seminar, Richard White offered the following ironic observation. Wilderness is managed land protected by 300-page manual specifying what can and cannot be done on it. Equally problematic is the definition of simulation. One of the first popular simulations in America was Buffalo Bill, Wild West Show, an entertainment that became popular as a mass media, even only at the frontier, was already disappearing. By the time, sorry, I have to cut. Yet it is the simulation, not the first-hand experience, that often enters popular consciousness at the operative cultural signifier. That means that there is all this cultural background behind any kind of images. And if we consider the picture that are made by this AI, they are first built up on the street view pictures that have been that had been reused by many artists for their quality because they were considered as poor images. And now we are trying to enhance them through HDR, considering that it should be like a pro-level quality, while today, from the artistic critic, the images from street view were praised for what they were bringing and showing the world differently. So this is about a post-internet sublime based on the street view romanticism. The question is what is the extent of these images? What is not present in the paper, it is that we don't know what they will be used for. Considering what is Google Maps today, for example, we know that there is a market of the photography and how they progressively used the users to build up their imagery data in the website. So I guess that if they generate if they generate their own photography, it might be for commercial use. And that would be interesting to discuss that with them. When I mean meeting deep learning halfway, it is because I think that today it would be really important to discover, especially from our human sciences language and especially semiotic language from my side, to discover how we both conceptualize before what we then formalize in the way we describe the world and build up artifacts. I've tried really roughly to explain how I would read, how I would write the different procedure of the algorithm on which is based creatism. And this is nonsense because I never formalize, never modelize any of the way I think, actually. And so there is two perspectives. First, my first question would be like, what conceptual language is behind the formal language we use, and how can we build up how can we develop a dialogue between IT and human sciences to think about this conceptual side before the way we build up this AI? And my second question would be how to redefine subjectivity through human-machine hybrids, considering that that we are facing those multiple eye of the machine that in themselves are building up or defining different way of subjectivities and layers of subjectivities between the machine eye. Thank you, and really sorry for the messy technical side of my PowerPoint.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank you
there you go.
so much, Pauline. That was wonderful. Thank you very much. I'm sure people will have lots of questions. So we're going to move on to the next paper, and then we'll think about them together at the end. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Pauline Nech, who describes himself as an earthling, a world citizen, a creative coder, and a software engineer at Algolia, in that order. His work consists in building tools for developers to leverage advanced technologies in their applications, focusing recently on the intersection of search engines and natural language understanding. His interests revolve around the impact of technology on our lives, from the creative potential it unlocks to the ethical challenges it surfaces. So, Paul-Louis, over to you.
Let me see. Pauline, can you? Yeah, there we go. Paul-Louis, I think you haven't turned on your microphone. We can't hear you.
All right, can you hear me now? Okay, so I'm gonna reshare the screen from the beginning. All right, can you see the first slide?
Yes.
Perfect. So hi everyone, I'm glad to be here with you today. Thank you very much to the organizers for getting this event together and for giving us the opportunity to being together in these specific times. But what better context to speak about our extended brains and bodies than a time where our physical bodies and brains are limited and we have to bridge that gap to actually be together. My paper and presentation are titled Serving Humans. Some of you might remember the TV series from the 60s, Twilight Zone. In a 1962 episode called To Serve Man, an alien race comes to Earth, promising peace and sharing technology. A linguist and his team set out to translate the alien's language, using a book whose title they deduce is To Serve Man. The story ends as such. The day arrives for Chambers' excursion to the alien planet. Just as he mounts the spaceship's boarding stairs, Patty runs towards him in great agitation. While being held back by an alien guard, Patty cries, "Mr. Chambers, don't get on that ship. The rest of the book, To Serve Man, it's a cookbook." In our service economy, services serve humans. But who is being served? We will start by taking a step back. Why are we talking about services?
Louis, sorry for I'm so sorry for interrupting. I wouldn't normally do that. I can only see the top of your presentation.
Ooh.
Is that the case for everybody else? Because like, I was feeling a bit alone, but I think, okay, so now it's back. Can you try and move through the slides maybe to see if that is working? Because, yeah. Okay, that's working now. Sorry.
Perfect. No worries. Thanks for interrupting here. So,
as you were.
In our service economy, services serve humans, but who is being served? We'll explore this question by taking a step back. Why are we even talking about services? We live in a time of ever-expanding horizon. The global body of knowledge is growing faster than ever. and so does the amount of opportunities it offers to us humans. This brings us to the ever-growing complexity of our world. This new environment requires that we improve our ability to understand and navigate complex systems, going beyond the historical limits of our bodies and brains. Take, for example, Dunbar's number. Studying primates, Robert Dunbar showed that there is a limit to how many individuals we can keep in close contact with. Extrapolating to the human brain size, this number would be between 100 and 200 individuals. And like me, you probably felt already this limitation, where it's a hard time to keep managing relationships at scale between all the people you met in your life. This shows how our brain is ill-equipped for the big social networks that we're going to traverse in today's world. Another example would be our attention span. We can only be mindful of a few items at the same time. And because the world is ever complexifying, we need to keep track of more and more items that affect us. So in this complex world, it's dangerous to go alone. We have to share the burden. And this is what psychologists have called transactive memory. I myself am bad at remembering birthdays, so I will rely on a partner to remember birth dates, while my partner will rely on me to remember weird technical solutions to the problems of our hardware. And that's fine. This is what enables humanity to thrive, going through groupthink and specializing. We can already describe language as a tool enabling groupthink. And this specialization is what caused the rise of services. Now, what is a service? Etymologically, it comes from the Latin servitium, which means servitude, slavery. When you do me a service, you are executing my will in spite of your own interest. Why would you do so? Probably due to reciprocal altruism. We expect the ones we help to help us in return when we need them. This has been a key to building civilization, to the point money can be seen as a representation of how many services I am owed. Thus, we live in an era of services. They are the city cleaning services, the healthcare system, or the online services that make up our daily lives. However, most services we interact with today are not doing it out of reciprocal altruism. Seeing them through the psychological lens might not be the best angle, as these services, instead of being based on reciprocal altruism, rather serve an economical interest. They have an incentive to doing this transaction and providing something to us. Is this still servitude? Who is getting something from it? Is this in our interest? This is not an easy question to answer because human interests are complex and sometimes opposed to each other. Take, for example, me yesterday evening at 1 AM, watching yet one more episode on Netflix and thinking it might be time to go to bed. On one hand, my short-term interest is to watch one more episode because that's what I want right now. But on the other, I'd rather rest for the big presentation of today. And so my short-term and long-term interests are at odds. We see this everywhere. We humans often eat more than we should. We procrastinate and so forth. Because of that, companies will go our way as long as our short-term interest aligns with their bottom line, even when this is at odds with our long-term interest. This disalignment is what makes superstimuli economically interesting. The concept of superstimuli was coined by Nico Tinbergen, an animal ethologist who was observing how a species of bird selects their brooding eggs. And he noticed that the species they studied were finding a red spot on the egg as a sign to take care of their children. And Nico was surprised that if he put a bigger egg with a bigger red spot in the nest, the bird would disregard their own children because there is a stronger signal nearby. And so the bird would take care of the fake egg with the big red spot instead. This is a superstimulus, an object optimized to our immediate desires by reinforcing the signals we used to follow. Take the example of a cookie. It is super fat, super sweet, super salty. 3 signals that we used to follow to find nutrients in our ancestral environment, but which today push us to something that is not in our interest. And casual mobile games use this everywhere. Look at Candy Crush and the highly saturated and animated colors and the very fast events happening that trigger your attention. It's what we can see as well in casinos with one-armed slot bandits that have bells and whistles everywhere. Eliezer Yudkowsky, the writer of the Less Wrong Rationality Project, takes the example of video games and of some Chinese gamers that have died after 57 hours of gaming non-stop. And he asks, how does a consumer product become so involving that after 57 hours of using the product, the consumer would rather use it for 1 more hour than eat or sleep? But this might not be the right way to question it, because we're questioning the individual gamer here. Eliezer Yudkowsky pushes us to reframe the question as a question for the system designer. Is there a limit to the market incentive to make video games more engaging? And by asking the question in this way, putting the onus on the system designer, we enter the seas of designed addictivity. The current economical incentives towards short-term profits makes these super stimuli tempting. Why would a designer refuse to implement autoplay next episode or any other feature that improves user retention? This is a strong temptation, and it explains why we see some anti-patterns or design patterns that go against the user's interest in many tech products. A cornerstone of anti-patterns is the use of variable rewards, which is a topic pioneered by Skinner, the father of behavioral psychology, when he studied the impact of rewards on habit forming. Skinner noticed that if you reward a rat for pulling a lever, every time they pull it, with the same reward, the rat soon gets bored and stops. However, if the rewards comes randomly, with some pulls but not others, the rat becomes hooked on pulling the lever. Not knowing if the next pull will be rewarded or not prevents the rat from getting used to that reward, prevents attenuation in his reward system, and ensures that the rat gets addicted. And this is a lesson that has been well understood by technological designers, to the point that today, it is a cornerstone of product design. Here I will be quoting Hooked, a manual to get users hooked on your products, in which the author Nir Eyal describes how variable rewards is a key mechanic to retain users. And the author takes the case of Pinterest, a website to find inspirational pictures, and the case of the user Barbara. When Barbara lands on Pinterest, not only does she see the image she intended to find, but she is also served a multitude of other glittering objects. The images are related to what she's generally interested in, but there are other things that catch her eye as well. The exciting juxtaposition of relevant and irrelevant, tantalizing and plain, beautiful and common, sets her brain dopamine system aflutter with the promise of a reward. Now she's spending more time on Pinterest, hunting for the next wonderful thing to find. Before she knows it, she spent 45 minutes scrolling. And this was not invented by product designers, or at least not product designers from the last century. The concept of variable rewards was pioneered by gambling machines. And you can explore this with the great interactive article by The Guardian on the design of addiction in slot machines. In this article, they explain how crucial random rewards are to create an addiction. And they phrase it this way. The average slot machine in Las Vegas has a 0.94 payback rate, which means you get 94 cents on every dollar you put. So if this is such a losing bet, why do people keep coming back to them? According to The Guardian, it is mostly due to variable rewards and to this unattenuation that is developed and baked into the products. No, this was about gambling machines from the last century. What about technological products? Well, let's ask a platform that helps people engage with their users. And so here is the quote that they start with. If I asked you for $1 and promised 94 cents in return, would you do it? Here, they describe two machines. And this is taken from AppQues, a platform that tells you how to engage your users, to turn our product into a growth engine. The machine A on the left is the first proposal. Give me $1, I'll give you 94 cents. I guess not many people here would take that bet. But look at that machine on the right. Sure, 80% of the time you lose, but you might well get the $1,000 jackpot. Does this feel more seducing? Is this a machine you might indulge into playing with? Let's hear what AppQues has to say. Even though the second machine has the same negative expected return, the anticipation of a potentially high reward, the $1,000 jackpot, supercharges our desire. However unlikely the jackpot is, the probability is always fixed. This next pool could be the one. Ah no, maybe next one. When you know this pattern, you start seeing it everywhere. Is the next item on my Facebook's feed yet another irrelevant news piece? Or is it the hot topic I regret missing? Is my next Tinder match a $0 left swipe? Or is it the person I'll spend the next decade with, the $1,000 jackpot? Even my company canteen now, they have events where you can try every day to win a dessert. You spin a wheel and maybe you get a free dessert. And they do this hoping to hook us on the habit of going there daily to try a roll. So let's take a step back. We have a technological ecosystem that predates on humans. Is that what we intended? What did we have in mind in the early days? Well, what was our hope when we created this layer of technology around us? Let's get back to the origins of this project. And what better origin than the internet, the web's own inventor, Sir Tim Berners-Lee. In 2005, he was very hopeful. And in an interview with CNN.com, he said, I hope we will use the net to cross barriers and connect cultures. We can see that at heart, the internet was about transcending our limits and connecting humanity. These are clearly humanist ideals. Great original goals. Where do we stand today? Well, Tim Berners-Lee gave a few recent interviews in which he develops his current assessment of the internet. For example, to Vanity Fair, in the article called I Was Devastated, Tim Berners-Lee says that for people who want to make sure that the web serves humanity, we have to concern ourselves with what people are building on top of it. We technological builders cannot only assume that the internet is a neutral platform that is going to bring the best of ourselves. We have to be critical of its applications. And when Sir Tim Berners-Lee looks at the recent events of the history of the web, with the domination of the ad-based web economy, the psychological profiling of users, the meddling with political affairs at a global scale, to him the facts are clear. We demonstrated that the web has failed instead of served humanity, as it was supposed to have done, and failed in many places. He adds later in the same interview that the increasing centralization of the web ended up producing, with no deliberate action of the people who designed the platform, a large-scale emergent phenomenon, which is anti-human. To me, this is as strong a statement as we could get on the criticism of the current technological platform. We had humanist goals, and we end up with an emergent anti-human phenomenon. So let's analyze this situation. Where did we fail to meet the original humanist goals? What causes the current ecosystem to be so far from these ideals? According to Sir Tim Berners-Lee, there are three sources of dysfunction today. The first one is deliberate and malicious intent. such as hacking and online harassment, where we really have bad actors that are malevolent. But to him, we cannot summarize the web's failure with malevolence. And Tim sees at least two systemic causes of the current failure. System design that creates perverse incentives, such as the advertising economy, which thrives on clickbait and fake news. As well, unintended negative consequences of the current design and of the current culture, such as the tone of our online discourse and our web's culture of outrage. So according to the web's father, although we need to acknowledge the maliciousness of some bad actors, the failure is systemic. We cannot solve it without reforming the incentives that shape interactions in this space. So how do we go solving a systemic failure? We visibly need to reshape incentives. And the first set of these is economical incentives. We can see how the advertising-based revenue model alienates the user. And we can see how centralized platforms concentrate power, which amplifies the conflict of interest with the users. So unless we reshape those economical incentives, for example, through regulation, we won't be able to fix their perverse consequences. But that's not enough. A source of dysfunction is our culture and how it allows or prevents great online discourse. Hence, we have to update our sociological incentives as well. Our first point of criticism is the reaction economy. As long as we optimize for likes and shares, we will reward virtue signaling and quick to propagate emotions over long and thoughtful pieces. You can look at people who have been discussing how to optimize for great online discourse instead. A source of inspiration is the Democracy and Game Theory video series by Université de Lausanne and Science for All. One of the episodes talking about conviction mutating into viral infections and how some kind of emotions propagate faster than others. Or to quote Tim Urban from Wait But Why in his great series on how we can do political thinking at scale, nothing spreads faster than anger. As long as we optimize for sharing velocity, we'll optimize for anger-inducing content instead of thoughtful content. So here we're taking really just Sir Tim Berners-Lee opinion on the web. And although he's very trustable as an authority, it can be interesting to look at this from a political and philosophical framing. And we can approach this challenge taking a framing from Spinoza and using two paramount concepts that this philosopher opposed: potentia, power, and potestas, force. Here, power is to be seen as the potential of being. To Spinoza, being is affecting and being affected by the world. The more I can affect and be affected, the more powerful I am. As opposed to potestas, which one could see as the net available force. Someone can show a strong force in a domain and yet be unable to leverage that force on their own. We humans cannot rely on pure power. Our individual weaknesses require that we cooperate to face this complex world and that we tie ourselves to other forces. But how far should we? Do modern services augment us, or do they augment us as long as we use them? Does this usage leave us stronger or weaker the next time we face the same task? Take the example of Google Maps that we've seen just before in Pauline's presentation. If I use Google Maps to navigate and I trust it blindly, it replaces my ability to navigate a city, and I'm now dependent on Google to move around. Whereas when I was using a compass to navigate, I was looking around me. I was sure relying on the tool, but I was also acquiring knowledge that allows me to better navigate if I lack the tool. And we can see how there is a conflict here, because what Google Maps wants, in some extent, is for me to be dependent of Google Maps. Or we could see it the other way around. What would be the user's benefit if those services were truly looking into my long-term interest? Maybe they would add friction in some places where it would make me stronger. Imagine Google Maps asking you, look around first, your destination is not far. Imagine Netflix proposing, it's 2 a.m., is it still a good time for autoplaying? Or imagine Facebook, when you're in a heated conversation with your friends, instead of optimizing for you to stay on the platform, proposing, wanna take this conversation offline. We see that this depends strongly on the interest alignment. Would an augmented, better me benefit the service? Or do they wanna avoid this augmented me, what Eliezer Yudkowsky describes as me plus plus, a me that is better in every way where I see shortcomings in the current me? The services perspective on this better me plus plus can be understood as well through the lens of Spinoza's concepts, conatus and tristia. These are quite well explained by Deleuze in his lexicon on Spinoza's ethics. He describes the conatus as the tendency to maintain and affirm your existence. Also the tendency to maintain and maximize your ability to be affected. And we can already notice something. The current social networks filter bubbles that have been well described by designers like Tristan Harris, which funnel us towards only content we agree with. They are limiting our ability to be affected by the world. They're limiting our ability to be open to change. And thus, they are fueling our sad affects, nos passions tristes, what Spinoza called tristia. On conatus versus tristia, Deleuze said, when your mode, your modality of existence, meets another mode, either the latter works with yours and composes together, for example, a food, a loved one, an ally, or conversely, it decomposes yours, destroys it, like a poison, a hated being, an enemy. In the first case, your mode's ability to be affected is fueled by joyous affects, based on joy and love. On the other case, it's fueled by sad affects, based on sadness and hatred. We can say that joy augments our ability to act, notre puissance d'agir, and that sadness diminishes it. The conatus is thus the effort to experience joy, to augment our ability to act, to imagine and find what is the cause of our happiness, what nourishes it and maintains it. Likewise, our effort to put away sadness, to imagine its cause, and to find what destroys the cause of our sadness. We can see that our conatus is fed by interacting with entities whose mode augments us, while tristia is fed by interacting with entities that diminish us. Phrased differently, some interactions will make us grow, becoming better selves. Some interactions make us shrink, looping on low instincts and self-destructive feelings. We then have to be careful in the services we tie ourselves to. How does their mode align with mine? Do the services I rely on augment my ability to act, fuel my ability to experience joy, to find sources of it, and to keep imagining ways to be ever more joyful? Or do they, in contrast, make me more miserable, less able to judge what affects my life, more vulnerable to external factors that affect my ability to act? With this framing, how do we defend ourselves against the latter kind of services? Thanks to these concepts, we now can see it boils down to critically assessing the mode alignment. Thus, we should first introspect. What is our interest? This gets back to gnoti seoton, know thyself. If I don't know what's my own interest, short and long term, I cannot work in this complex world as I would like to. But introspection is only the first step. We then need to go into deep research regarding the service that we face. What is their interest? What are the short-term and long-term incentives this service will follow? Is there any interference between their short-term and long-term goals that we should worry about? We've seen in Pauline's presentation regarding Google Maps that also their short-term interest is to guide me in the city. Their middle-term interest is to have me as an advertising product. but their long-term interest might be to use me as training data to build photographies. We need to be very careful of what's the long-term plan of each of these services, unless we might risk being surprised. And once we have these two pieces of information, it's the time for critically assessing what is their alignment. This will be our way to navigating this complex and adversarial world. And at least now we have a path to survive and thrive in this new environment. A path which we formalized as a method. And to an engineer like me, that's very reassuring, because if we have a method, this complex issue becomes simply a tooling problem. We are ill-equipped to face the current environment. As we saw with Tim Berners-Lee analysis, we have to address the last two pressing issues of dysfunction, the last two sources of dysfunction, with systemic solutions. These solutions might not be technological, or at least not in silico, or political institutions. The legal systems that we crafted over centuries should be leveraged to correct the perverse incentives of the current economical sphere. Likewise, our culture is part of the problem. The current tone of online discourse and what Tim Berners-Lee called the web's culture of outrage have some responsibility in the current failures of the web to serve humanist ideals. On this second source of dysfunction that is our culture, the humanities are more than ever needed to defend and further extend the humanist project as the Anthropocene will expand across time and space. But even having said that, we cannot ignore the first source of dysfunction, deliberate, malicious intent. Granted, economic incentives are strong, but implementing perverse, anti-human patterns in technology stems from at least some malicious intent by a human agent towards other humans. And as long as non-benevolent agents exist, as long as the economic incentives to deceive humans are strong, as long as technology keeps better understanding our nature, we might face in the coming decades a hard alternative. Either we stay like we are, and we accept neuroscience-infused capitalism is catching up. Each of our desires will be fed sooner and sooner, ultimately being answered before the question is raised. We can already see this happening in the video content space, where YouTube has gotten so good at answering what will I watch next, that now many people simply open YouTube and pick between suggestions instead of even thinking what they want to watch. So on one hand, we don't change ourselves and we conserve who we always were. But then we're losing agency. We are now merely responding to technological suggestions, to the point we became merely passive consumers of technological decisions. Think humans in WALL-E, where our only life is going from bed to food to entertainment to bed, which has been predetermined by algorithms to follow our desires before they arise. So that's one option if we continue on the same track. But we have an alternative. On the other hand, we could adapt to this new environment. Just like in the past, we had to defend ourselves against carnivorous beasts that were trying to feed on our physical resources. We now have to defend ourselves against faceless entities that are trying to feed on our mental resources. Defending against them might mean losing part of our current human nature. We can imagine many ways to augment a human to be stronger-willed, like a virtual assistant helping me judge my decisions against my long-term interest to balance my short-term tendencies. To some extent, we're already doing this through critical thinking education, using agendas to manage our scheduling at scale, or using reminders to keep everything that matters to us in our short-term memory. It's been a long time that we are already threading this path of human cognitive augmentation. As we enter a world where our environment, our bodies, and our cognitive tooling are changing faster than before, where extending ourselves may well be the only way to avoid surrendering to algorithms that have been optimized for economical incentives, which often won't align with our interests, The question we ask thus becomes, would we rather change what our traditional humanity was, if that's what it takes to remain actively human? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul-Louis. And I'm going to, there we go. So as we did before, just moving on to our third speaker today, I think I'm hoping questions are sort of piling up in everybody's mind because it's firing off in all directions today. That's fun. So our third speaker today is Rémi Leblond. After a couple of short jobs as a data scientist, Rémi Leblond got a PhD at INRIA in Paris, studying asynchronous optimization for machine learning and structured prediction using neural networks. I totally know what that means. Now a research scientist at DeepMind in Paris, he mainly focuses on bridging imitation and reinforcement techniques for structured applications, such as natural language processing or combinatorial optimization. Outside of work, Rémi enjoys books, films, TV series, strategic games, and French pastries. And Rémi, the floor is yours.
All right, thanks a lot, Jen, for the introduction. Can you all see the screen? Okay, great. Hello, everyone. I'm really excited to be here, albeit virtually, to share with you a few thoughts I have about how I think we can now co-evolve with the quote-unquote intelligent machines that we are currently building. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about for the next 25 minutes. I'll want to cover just about 4 points. And the first of these is to introduce not a formal, but a practical definition of machine learning, because I think machine learning is a very loaded topic. And there's lots of, it's almost phantasmagorical in the sense that we think it can do anything and everything. So it's a good thing if we have a bit of a practical explanation of what it actually is, right? And once I've done that, I'll focus on a couple of lists. And the first list is the items that machine learning can actually do today. And the second list is the list of the items that machine learning cannot do today. And as we'll see, one of the two lists is a lot longer than the other. And I'll let you guess which is which. Now, by this stage, I hope that you will already be persuaded that human beings are still very, very much at the center of all things, even in the world of machine learning. But if you do need some more reassurance, I will develop why I think we very much need humans in the loop. And finally, I will briefly sketch what I think should be our forward path to the next stage of human evolution with our intelligent machines. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to give a bit of a practical definition of what machine learning is, right? So notice here, I'm not talking about artificial intelligence in general. I'm going to be talking about a subfield, which is called machine learning. And the reason for that is that's where I'm an expert for once. And the second thing is that basically the only thing that works in the world of artificial intelligence today is linked to machine learning. So that will be a slightly more focused topic. And then in the world of machine learning, there are many, many different flavors, right? There's supervised learning, reinforcement learning, active learning, unsupervised learning, semi-supervised learning, online learning, self-supervised learning, and I could go on for a few minutes here. I'm only going to talk today about supervised learning for a couple of reasons. First off, I don't have the time to cover all of the other types of learning. And the second thing is supervised learning is the most actively adopted paradigm, let's say, the one where we have the better results. And it's a good poster child in the sense that pretty much everything I'm going to say about supervised learning in general will also apply to all of these other forms of learning. Okay, and now drilling down even further, in supervised learning, I'm going to be talking specifically about classification, which is one of the most important applications. Right, so I'm sure you've all seen some variation of this slide in one presentation or another. The task here will be image recognition, and what we want to do is we want to have a computing system to which we can feed images of either cats or dogs, and we want it to be able to recognize whether or not the image pictures a cat or a dog, right? So this is, in essence, a classification problem. We give images, and we have to put the image in a given bin, either the cat bin or the dog bin. Now, classification seems very, very simple in the abstract, but of course you can do many more interesting things than just to classify cats and dogs. And by that, I don't mean that you can also classify human and ice zombies, although this is something that might come in handy if you're suddenly stuck in Westeros. But another example that's a bit further afield is the example of machine translation. So in our first example of classification, we had images as our inputs, and we wanted a single word as our outputs. So that the output space is fairly simple. Here in machine translation, our inputs are not going to be images, they're going to be sequences of words in a given language, so a sentence here in Hungarian, and the outputs are going to be sequences of words in a different language, here English. Right, so the way we solve this task in machine translation is through classification. So my point here is classification is actually a fairly powerful paradigm, so it's worth talking about for a bit. Okay, so going back to the example of images, here we have our input space. All of our inputs are images, and our outputs are labels or single words, basically. And what we want to do is we want to learn a mapping F. I'll call it F, and this is the only sort of mathematical notation in the presentation, so you can rest easy. But basically, we want to learn a mapping from images to words, right? Now, we know such mapping exists because, for instance, you have one in your brain, right? You see these pictures, and you know exactly to which word they correspond, right? So we know that this F exists. We just want to replicate it, in some sense, in our computing system so it can do it for us. Right. So how do we solve this? How do we go about finding this mapping from image inputs to word outputs? We do that in 4 steps, basically. The first step will consist in creating a curated data set of examples with both inputs and outputs that our machine is going to be able to learn from. Right? Without the examples, we have nothing to feed to a machine, and it's not going to be able to solve the task. So that's the first step. The second step is going to be for us to decide where to look for our mapping function f. Right. So now we could look for f in the space of all of the possible functions, from our image input space to our word output space. Unfortunately, that's not really tractable because the space of all these possible functions is infinite. And it's not even the good kind of infinite, it's the really, really bad kind of infinite. Like, it's really, really much too big. So we can't look through that whole space. So instead, we'll do the next best thing, which is we will decide on a much, much smaller space of functions. We'll define a family of functions that all look somewhat similar to one another. And then instead of trying to find the perfect function f, the perfect mapping function, what we will look for is the best possible approximation in our smaller family of functions. Now, that's step 2. And we're now moving on to step 3, where basically I've said we wanted to find the closest approximation. And so the first thing we need to do is to define a notion of distance. Right? We can't define what close is if we don't know what the distance is. And the way we do that is through the design of what we call a loss function. And what the loss function is going to tell us for a given candidate function is how well it is performing on the data set we're training on. Right? So at the very beginning of training, we'll have an F that's probably a very bad approximation, and so we'll perform really poorly. And at the end of training, hopefully, we'll have a much closer approximation, and we'll perform much better. So now this is one thing, the loss function, how to evaluate one of the functions that we're currently at. And the second thing is an optimization mechanism. And what this does is tell us what next F we should try evaluating, basically. So we have a candidate, and we know it's not good enough, but now we need to figure out which next candidate we should try. And by this iterative procedure, hopefully in the end, we end up at a candidate that's really good, right? And then there's the fourth step, and the fourth step consists in running this optimization loop iteratively to find the best approximation of F we can in the family of function we've decided. Okay, and now this is basically the end of all of the mathy type of content of the talk. So you can rest easy if that wasn't particularly clear, which I'm sure it wasn't. But the fault of that is on me. And now a bit of semantics. Here, in all of the steps that we have taken, where would you say that the machine has learned anything? My own personal view of things is that the machine hasn't learned anything anywhere, pretty much, right? So who creates the data set? It's the humans, basically. Who decides where to look for approximation? Still human beings. The people who design the loss function and the optimization mechanism, I will let you guess, but the answer is, again, human beings. And then the fourth step is interesting, because now it's not only human beings launch the loop, and then there's a lot of repetitive and pretty boring arithmetic operations that need to happen, and the machines do that for us, right? But it's basically the only thing we do. And something that's interesting to think about is the amount of degrees of freedom that the machine has. And basically, the machine has 0 degrees of freedom. It's doing exactly what we're doing it to do. Of course, what we're telling it to do, is somewhat more vague than what we usually tell machines to do. In regular programming, we give very, very specific instructions to the machine. Here, we're going to also give very specific instructions to the machine, but what we're going to tell it to do is basically to write a program which we don't have the tools to write. So for instance, if I want to create a program where I say, well, I tell the machine how to recognize a cat from a dog, I don't know how to do that. It's just too complicated. What I do know how to do is to tell the machine how to generate this program itself, right? My larger point here is that usually you program machines and they have absolutely 0 degrees of freedom, but you program in a very, very precise way. Here, we're going to program the machine in a more of a vague fashion. Basically, we're going to program a program, which in some sense is metaprogramming. But ultimately, the buck stops with a human being who's telling the machine exactly what to do. So conceptually, it's not all that different from what we were doing before. All right, so that was my first sort of practical presentation of what machine learning actually is. And it leads me to the second part of this presentation, where we're going to ask ourselves, what can artificial intelligence do? And more importantly, what cannot it do? Which is, spoiler alert, a lot more things. All right, so first thing, what works? And now I'm going to be very roughly speaking, and I'm going to be exaggerating. There's a lot more things that we can actually do with machine learning, but roughly speaking, the one thing that really works well is imitation, or supervised learning, as I called it before. Now, in supervised learning, if we can curate big enough data sets of high quality input-output examples, then we have a reasonable expectation that we can create models that perform fairly well, right? And we have proof of that. We have multiple examples, which include, for instance, computer vision applications. So nowadays, we're able to train really, really good machines to separate cats from dogs, for instance, but we can also do more interesting things than that. And another domain where we have pretty nice performance is natural language processing. So machine translation is an example, right? So for language pairs where we have a lot of paired data, where we have a lot of good quality input-output pairs, then we can train really nice translation models. The same isn't true, sadly, for language pairs where we have relatively few resources. Now, you will notice that generally speaking, the tasks that I'm talking about, the tasks where machine learning is good at, are very, very focused and very specific tasks, right? Now, on these very focused and specific tasks, our models have become really, really good, right? And here is the obligatory plug for the company that employs me, where we've had some fairly significant breakthroughs in the last few years. And notably, we've been able to, in the space of games, we've been able to create models that play the game of Go better than any human being in the world, which is a fairly significant achievement. And we've also been able to create artificial intelligence that plays video games really, really well, at least some of them. And now, on a more practical side, in terms of computer vision, it's been estimated that by now, our computer vision models have actually gotten better at spotting some things like breast cancer from radiology than actual human-trained radiologists, right? So machine learning can do a lot of really interesting things. And this, on one hand, is great. On the other hand, it's a bit disconcerting to see that the machines have become, on some axes, superhuman, that they can do better than what we do. Right. So the question is this really a paradigm shift? Is there something fundamentally different now that machines can do some things better than we can than before? And my argument is that it's absolutely not a paradigm shift, and that this has been the case for decades and actually centuries, and actually it's always been the case. So for instance, here on the left, you have a very small plastic calculator, which nobody would dream of calling intelligent. But on the other hand, if you get into a contest with it on who can make multiplications faster, I think you're probably going to lose, right? So this thing is not very impressive, right? And we don't feel threatened by it too much. But on the other hand, it is superhuman on the axis of multiplication speed. Now, in the middle, you have a very nice tortoise, which can live for up to 200 years, approximately. So this tortoise, again, is superhuman on the specific axis of lifespan, right? Which means that machines weren't what really changed the fact that some things are superhuman, right? Things have been superhuman for a really long time. And on the left is my personal favorite. It's the lowly tardigrade. And the tardigrade is less than a millimeter long. It has a microscopic brain. It can do basically nothing, but it has one thing that's very, very impressive. Well, actually two things, but I'm going to talk about the one because the second is not the subject fit for this presentation. But anyways, you can ask me in the questions. The tardigrade can survive in hard vacuum, which means you can drop it naked in outer space and it's not going to die for at least 10 years, which is fairly impressive, right? I do not want you to picture me naked in outer space. Just to give you a brief preview of what would happen, despite the fact that the temperature would be minus 100 and something degrees, my blood would boil, my eyeballs would explode, and the rest would not be quite as nice as the beginning. So again, nobody feels threatened by the tardigrade, but on the very specific axis of living in outer space, it is much, much better than we are. And the way I think about it is basically that when we think about machine intelligence, we're sort of asking the wrong questions, because we think of machine intelligence in the same terms as human intelligence. Now, I'm going to misquote Edgar Dijkstra, who's a very, very talented and famous mathematician from last century, who said something along the lines of, wondering whether machines can think is as inane as wondering whether submarines can swim. Submarines are machine. They can't swim. They can move underwater when and only when a human asks them to, right? And they can do that very efficiently, and it can be very fast, and they're very impressive. But basically, they obey whatever the human is asking them to do. And for our machine intelligence system, the situation is not that different from the situation of a submarine. Okay, so now hopefully you're a bit reassured as to our role with regards to machine intelligence. And now we can focus on what doesn't work for machine learning. And the first thing that doesn't really work, even though it's starting to, but still not great, is generalization. So what is generalization? Generalization is whether or not your model can perform well on data that it hasn't seen during training, right? So if we take our examples, our initial example of the classifier between cats and dogs, this classifier, can you guys still see the slide? Something a bit strange happened. Okay, so this classifier could recognize normal pictures of cats and dogs, but it couldn't recognize this picture. And so even though it would be really good at recognizing normal cats and dogs, if you go out of distribution, if you have a cat that's a bit strange, let's say, then the model would be completely lost. Right. Whereas a human being would instantly classify this as a cat, or probably more like as a gigantic mistake from the part of Dame Judi Dench, but that's neither here nor there. So that's one thing that doesn't work, generalization. A second thing that doesn't really work is transfer. Here the question we're going to ask is, if we train a model on a very specific task, is it going to be able to perform well on a different task? And first we'll start with relatively similar tasks, and then hopefully with really different tasks. So now we've trained a model to be really, really good at Go, right? But if we ask that model to play chess, it's going to be terrible. And by terrible, I mean actually really, really terrible. Here again, there's a central difference with the way humans work, in the sense that if I were to train for years and years on Go, and then I was presented with a new board game with new rules, I would probably be very bad for the first couple of games, but after a few games, my performance would become reasonable. Not so for the machine model. The model would be really, really bad until it had played an enormous amount of games, right? So there is no knowledge transfer from one board game to the other, basically. And finally, although it is by no means the end of the list, I'm going to focus on understanding, which is another thing that doesn't work, or doesn't work too well in the field of machine learning for now. Now, here what you have is an example from prompt to GPT-3, which is a state-of-the-art, humongously big, very, very powerful language model. And now, basically, we ask this model, which is heavier, a toaster or a pencil? And this is the answer we get. The answer we get is a pencil is heavier than a toaster, which means a couple of things. So first, it's a nice sentence. It's got everything in the right place, right? So it sounds like English. It could almost pass as the sentence a human being would write. But on the other hand, in terms of understanding, we see that our very powerful model doesn't even know something as simple as the fact that a toaster is actually much heavier than a pencil, unless you're using a really, really weird pencil. So to sum it up, understanding, transfer, generalization, all three things that are very important and that humans can do without thinking about it twice are things that our models are still lacking. Right, so by now, I hope you're you're already convinced that humans are still very much necessary. But I'll do a quick recap of where we're needed more precisely. Right. So in the machine learning loop, we're needed pretty much everywhere. And the first thing is fairly obvious, right? Is we built the machine learning loop ourselves, right? We built it, we find problems in it all the time, we iterate over it, we fix it, it's broken again, and we continue that way. So who built the loop? We did. Now, who provides the data to the machine learning model? It's also us, right? And a machine learning model is only going to be as smart as the data we put in. So basically, there's no smart model without humans, again. Third question is, who is going to check and interpret the results? In machine learning, we ask the model to do something, we train the model to do something in a rather vague way. If you compare it to what you actually want to do, what you actually want to do with a recognizing system is you want a system that accurately recognizes cats and dogs. But the way you program this is very convoluted, and you don't just ask the computer to do that. So you have to be very careful about the results that you get out of your model, and these might be very surprising. So you need checks, and you need interpretation, and you need refinement, and you need debugging, and all of that, again, is done by human beings. And finally, our models are also completely ignorant of a number of things that are really important to us as human beings, right? Our models don't know what right or wrong is. They have no notion about ethics, etc. And all of that means that we have to exercise a fairly strict amount of control over them. And again, machines are not going to do this. We're going to do this every time. Right. So now I will briefly sketch what I think is a reasonable path forward for a specific evolution with these new intelligent machines that we are currently building. And the first thing I think we need to do is to not panic, right? Because nobody is interested in replicating human intelligence. That problem has been solved, and has been solved for quite a while. We don't do it in silico, we do it in utero. And while I fully admit this is a painstaking process that somehow involves 9 months of vomiting and a lot of sleep deprivation, it is something that we have known to do for a really, really long time. And I'll also admit that the results are somewhat hazardous, but still. So no one is really interested in that particular problem. The whole purpose for artificial intelligence is to use it to solve problems that we as humans have no answer for, right? And I know 2020 has been a pretty terrible year already, so I won't list on the slides all of the problems that we are facing right now. But generally speaking, they're getting more and more complicated, and they're getting more and more dangerous, and they're also getting more urgent. So we basically need all the help we can get. And humanity's intelligence is great, but it also comes with some limitations. For some problems, we have to rely on machines, right? We've been doing it for decades with computers, which can do boring stuff much, much faster than we can. And actually, if you don't think of only the limitations in terms of intelligence, but also in terms of physical constraint, we've been doing it for centuries, for millennia, right? We've been using various animals to do our job for time. So this really isn't a very different paradigm that we're entering. Now, the good news is that we now have a pretty massive upgrade to our toolkit. We're getting a new tool, and it's really, really nice. And that is because we finally have machine learning algorithms that work, right? Now, with this tool, we can do pretty incredible things, but only when we combine them with human guidance and expertise. Here, I have an example, this nicely rotating GIF, where this is something that came out of DeepMind a few weeks ago, where basically we're now able to take a sequence of DNA and predict the three-dimensional structure of the protein that it's going to create, right? And this is a very, very difficult problem for which humans don't really have an answer. It's really hard to do in your head, but it's also really important because it means that we're going to be able to do some things like drug discovery or disease understanding much more easily with these three-dimensional structures. So again, we have this new tool. We can do incredible things with it. And now, as to the worry that these models are going to replace our scientists or other workers, I really like this quote by Felix Nense. And what he says basically is, artificial intelligence will not replace radiologists, but radiologists who do not use AI will be replaced by those who do, right? We're getting a superior tool to whatever we had before. And so now we get to use it and to have much better results, much better diagnostics, etc. So it sort of stands to reason that we should use those. And in terms of the social implications, of course, we're in the face of radical innovation, right? And so that can be a bit scary. But I think what we have to remember is that this isn't the first time that this happened. It's not the second time. It's not the third time. Actually, throughout the whole of human history, we have lived in eras of radical innovations. So, and here I've just used 3 examples, which are the printing press, the steam engine, and the personal computer. But I could quote a lot more radical innovations. So now my argument is we have a lot of experience with these, actually. What we need to do is not panic, but to study history. And what history tells us, on the one hand, is usually we fall back on our feet, which is a good sign. And what it also tells us is what has worked, what hasn't worked, and how we might be able to make sure that when we do land on our feet, it's not too painful, right? And we have a wealth of examples to learn from. So I think the rational thing to do now is to use the new tools that we have at our disposal, but to make sure through comprehensive and comparative study of history that we are adapting our society in the right ways. And on that note, I think I've extended my time by quite a bit, so I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Rémi. Thank you to all 3 speakers. I think we can all agree that we've had a really sort of fascinating range of things to think about and look at. I think so. We were thinking of yes, doing a question session. And then sort of opening up for the roundtable and for something a little bit more, maybe a little bit more informal and less necessarily sort of directed at our speakers. So yeah, I think I'm just gonna, open questions to the floor, including my co-hosts. If you want to ask questions, just please do so.
Okay, I have a question for Paul-Louis, if you don't mind if I start. Thank you, Paul-Louis, for your presentation. If you did answer this question right at the end of your presentation, I'm sorry, because I missed the last 5 minutes. But this was my question. So you were talking about, how we design tools to serve us better, in the long term and not in the short term. And, there's like Tristan Harris and his Center for Humane Technology, he's trying to implement that. And I happen to live with an engineer who thinks that those tools are already there. But of course, they are for the privileged, i.e. people who know the sector or people who have the money to get it. But the vast majority of us, don't have access to those tools or, So do you think these tools are going to become available to everyone? Or do you think there's going to be a sharp divide between people who know how to use the technology well and people who don't? And I'm sorry if you've already answered that. Where do you see things going?
That's a great question. Indeed, this is the main, how do you say? This is the main intersection of our path today. We have 2 options in front, and it's gonna, to me, depend on what are the strongest forces that shape our future. As described by Tim Berners-Lee, we cannot ignore the weight of the economical incentives. And so even if our human culture is ready. Even if each of us wants to be augmented, as long as there are so strong incentives to diminish us, like you said, the tools to be augmented are only going to be available to the privileged ones. I think this is what we could see in recent technological advances, be it through genetical therapy or be it, for example, the Google glasses that have been by the start priced to only be accessible to a select few. So as long as we have economical actors that have such a strong incentive to privilege some against others, people who want to go in a different way can only go so far. So I feel this is mainly a question of, can we get a hold on the economical structure around us? Can the humanist project be the stronger hand in this fight? And that's not a question I think I can answer today.
Okay, thank you very much.
Other questions? Sarah, did you have a question?
Yeah. Sorry, yeah, I have a question for Pauline and one for Rémi. I'm going to start with my question for Rémi. You spoke about the ethics of machine learning at some point in your presentation. And we know that facial recognition systems have often trouble identifying the faces of Black women, for example. And I was wondering, to which degree do you work with I think it's called algorithmic accountability? I mean, to what degree do you deal with fairness and ethics issues in your work? Because how do you counter, rather, the bias that is built into digital technology?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I think this problem has only just, I mean, we've become aware of this problem in the last few years, because at first we were just so focused on making anything work, that we really weren't focused on these issues, because nothing was actually working. So we just wanted to push the envelope there. But of course, in the last few years, we've gotten to the point where the tool is starting to work. And when the tools start working, you start applying them in the real world. And as soon as you do that, you see all of the problems with these new tools. So now, all the questions of fairness, ethics, how to make sure that our algorithm and our data sets are unbiased are forefront. And they're very important for us. It's just something that's relatively new, but not because we didn't think it was important before, just because the problem didn't really exist before because the systems were so bad.
Thank you. And can I ask my question to Pauline now? Yeah. So Pauline, you're currently teaching at l'École des Mines d'Alès, I think what you said. And I was wondering, what is, as someone working in the humanities, what is your concrete experience of working with engineers, and how do you negotiate this dialogue?
Thank you, Sarah, for your question. First, I would like just to apologize because I had like huge technical problems on my presentation. That means that all my notes disappear before I started my presentation. So I'm really sorry for that. Second, about the École des Mines d'Alès, I don't teach there anymore. It was years ago. It was a master that was in between communication studies and engineer studies. So it was a bit particular. It wasn't like for IT students. And then it was interesting because there was some like what we call like formation continue and other like formation initiale. That means like some were coming back to studies while others were just doing like their proper classes. So what we were trying to do, it was actually what we are doing here. It means like taking new IT and deconstructing the imaginaries that they build about like society, how to use IT, what is the place of those artifacts. And actually like the question you just asked Rémi about like oh, behind any technique there is a conceptualization that is coming from culture and language. And so like we can from human sciences study that as text actually as objects that are built as that are symbolical objects, actually. So that's what we are mostly trying to do. And that's what I've been teaching mostly, especially about digital maps, all the optical devices online, and the idea of like, oh, they are actually setting in a specific way the reality and the way we perceive the world.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you both. So there's a question from one of our previous speakers in the chat, Bettina. Yes, and she wrote it in. So Bettina, feel free to stop me and just ask your question yourself. Otherwise, I'm just going to read it out. Bettina says, I was wondering how Rémi relates his compelling presentation, which sort of dispels fears of replacement, to Paul-Louis' criticism of the application of these systems. She says, I think we can all agree that the technology itself is not the problem, but do you see potential or current ethical complications with what is being done now? So I think that's probably a question for both of you.
I mean, it's a difficult question in the sense that there's a lot that's being done now, and there's a lot that's being done in very different places. I think we're now building tools that are going to be really useful for a whole lot of applications. And as always, when you're building a tool, you're thinking about how they can be used. And so you're trying to build them in such a way that they're not used for nefarious purposes, of course. I think the benefits that can come from leveraging these tools in our lives could be humongous. But of course, I think that there needs to be proper accountability for how all of this is used, and potentially even for what types of research happens. And this is something that researchers are really interested in doing, and it started to happen from the ground up. But ultimately, I think this is more of an ethical and political question, and that pretty much everybody should seize the opportunity to decide what's going to be fair and what's not going to be fair, what's going to be able to be used and what's not going to be used. It's not a question for the researchers themselves only. It's a question for the whole of society. And of course, anytime you come up with an innovation, you have to think about how it's going to be used, what's going to be allowed, what's not going to be allowed. And to me, that's just the natural process of things to which everyone should be associated.
I have a question that's it's just a kind of follow-up on this question. One of the complications that I thought about was that right now, computers are starting to be able to create pretty convincing texts. And so, of course, I mean, I'm doing literature, so mostly looking up poems written by computers, and this is just fun and creating beauty. But apparently what they can do better than this already is creating press articles, for example. So I was thinking of this, or about the videos that can be doctored so that videos can pretty much say anything. So my question is just from a technical point of view, would there be a possibility to build into the system something that could say this was written by a machine? Is that something that could be implemented? Is it something that scientists would not want to hear about? What do you think about this?
I mean, there's already some research. I mean, this is a problem that's very interesting to researchers in general.
It's all about fake news, actually. I mean,
and there's a couple of things to say about that.
Pretty dangerous text as well. So
yeah, the first thing is that fake news predates our new technical capabilities by a lot, right? And I remember seeing a talk about fake news used, I think it was in the USSR anyways. It's like fake pictures, doctored pictures.
No, yeah.
These are things that have been used for a really long time.
No doubt.
And so there are a couple of answers to those. The first answer is to keep doing what's been done for a really long time, which is to combat these things, and potentially you need new technological solutions because the illusion has become a bit harder to spot, even though there's still fairly easy ways you can usually tell. Of course, for poetry, then maybe it's one of the hardest things, where it's really hard to decide whether or not it's a human or a machine or a model that wrote. But for pretty much everything else, for now, it's still relatively easy. And the other thing is we have there is research into sort of fingerprinting the algorithms that we can use in such a way that you can say with absolute certainty, oh, this was generated by an actual camera, this was generated by a machine. But all of this is, I mean, there's going to be a bit of an arms race in the sense that if some people are interested in using those for nefarious purposes, then we will have to come up with better and better solutions to make sure that they can't. But more generally, that's something that should be controlled, again, by society in general. Like, I get that that putting dangerous tools in the hands of anyone is a problem, but we think basically, I mean, I think in general the potential problems are maybe not as significant as the potential gains we could have from that. And this is something we think about when deciding on what we're going to work next. If it's something that is incremental for our benefit, but has very significant risks, then it's something we're not interested in working on.
Thank you. Thanks. Do you have other questions? Pauline, I saw you sort of nodding along. Did you have a response to that question, or?
Nothing else that rephrasing what Rémi says, the technology should be subdued to our political decisions and culture. Ultimately, it's going to enable us to go faster in a direction. The direction we choose is ours, or at least should. Then this being said, I do myself have a question, which is for Pauline. You've been discussing earlier, taking the paper of Creatism, that they were framing this problem, assuming there is a universal aesthetics metric. And hearing that you are quite critical about this concept, I wonder, would you say there is even any hope left for universal aesthetics?
Thank you for your question and your presentation. About this idea of a universal aesthetic metric, and about hope left. Like, first, I'm really wondering how you can build up actually a metric of aesthetic, considering this concept. And that is the whole problem on which you base the value or you evaluate it. And I think today, and that kind of how do you say, regroup the question that were asked as well about what do we do with technologies, as well which paradigm do we choose to build up values. And so are we still in a paradigm where values is a question of equivalency, or are we building it on what matters, what we are paying attention to, something that is more qualitative? So first you have to choose whether you decide something that is based on a quantity or a quality. And then on both sides, you have to decide after on which scale, on your system of references, and you build up this system of values. So obviously it's a too wide and complicated question for myself to have a proper answer, but I'm not even sure that it's desirable to wish for a universal aesthetic metric or even a universal definition. And especially as it's a pretty balance between what is how it's always conceived as something that is coming from the subject itself and something as a metaphysic. So I think today the way we deal with, especially with those technologies, is how we take count of subjectivities. So maybe we should give up for a while the idea of something universal. I hope it answers a bit.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pauline. I'd have to say that's my idea of something terrifying. It's like someone asking you, so what about a universal aesthetics? I'd be like, oh my God. Hervé, you had a question.
Yes, thank you. For Pauline, again, the point is, like for judging if something is intelligent or not, in the paper they decided they wanted to judge whether something is beautiful or aesthetical or not. And they do as Turing did, they ask humans. And the point is, it's a metric. Somehow it gives you a number. If let's say 60% of the humans says, okay, this is reasonably, according to me, it has been produced by the 10 best photographers. The fact that 60% of the people say that is a metric. But the point is, this is what Turing invented, is that when you have to judge such subjective stuff, ask humans. And the question is what you are doing with that metric. What they are doing, it's just to say, okay, this works in sense that it produces images that are judged as beautiful by humans, and that's it. So it's not a matter of quantifying the things, telling the truth about what is beautiful or what is not beautiful. It's just a matter to see how humans can be tricked by the system. And for defining intelligence, and this is very fundamental, Alan Turing proposed this kind of measure of how humans can be tricked by an intelligent system when it's talking to somebody else. So indeed, it's a very relevant way to evaluate the system, but it's no more than that. This is what I would say, no more than that. But it's quite relevant because, as you said, it's subjective, and nobody will say in an absolute way that this is this image deserves 15/20 mark or whatever. It's not the point.
Okay, thank you. Like, if I understood well your question, you're wondering like it's still a metric, considering we can.
No, sorry, I forgot to raise the question. The question is where you seem to be somehow frightened by this, to say, oh, people try to rationalize beauty or whatever. Maybe this is how I understood your interrogations about the claim. First of all, the guys are using in the title of the paper, they use some buzzwords to make the paper. It's like journalism, you know. It's even inside for scientific papers, it has to have good titles. But the point is, they do not pretend. I think I've not read the paper, but you don't need to be afraid of that, because the purpose is not to define what is beautiful and what is not. The purpose is to define is my algorithm able to trick a human, and that's not exactly the same question.
No, I completely understand. First, it's not being frightened. I think my point of view is that as it's an interdisciplinary dialogue, is that if I do respect the mathematical language and the fact that I understand the aim of the purpose of the experience, that is trying to fake a picture to generate, and with all the fact that it's a tiny project inside a wider project, because I know it's like training basically a specific kind of deep learning that might be used in another purpose. So in a way, it's it's a gimmick. It's just a gimmick in their training in a way. But how can we use in a scientific paper such concept without defining it, while it's important and define cultures? So it's not being frightened. It's more why there is no culture of human sciences that is conveyed in a way in the way we define cultural objects. And so then to an extent, it's not saying that when we say subjective, we don't have to confund that with the idea of it's relative, it's not equivalent. It doesn't mean that it doesn't matter of any subject has his own definition of aesthetics or things like that. That means that there can happen to have some cultural paradigm. But the idea is it's more like, how do we build up a general practice of dialectic in a way? That means that every concept, every cultural form, every symbol has to be permanently questioned in the context in which it is produced and circulates. You see what I mean?
Not
And
really.
is that like we start producing automatically generated picture today, and
yes.
right now it's just an experiment, but then if it starts to be used and diffused on many websites, and then starts to be I don't know, like I guess it's to be on the marketplace for companies, not to bill photographers to brand their produce or things like that. And the idea of like saying this is artistic, while is it artistic, is it plastic, is it aesthetic? And you see it's like all the tiny differences that it's related to that, and how we build up then the idea that it might be like I'm sorry,
yes, but
there are...
you can question the motivation of the researchers. This is interesting. For example, the economical motivations of the researcher. This is a point, but maybe this. I would say this is very general to any kind of technical progress. As Eric said, it can be any progress is motivated by the economical considerations, and maybe you can say that those people want to replace, to make artificial artists. Maybe to produce beauty that can be sold. For example, beautiful movies on Netflix that have not been designed by any human. You can consider that this is their project, but accusing them with that, I think it's a different subject from evaluating the beauty of something that is produced artificially by using the human judgment. The second question is just a scientific question. Can we somehow catch into science something that is relative to the subject? And this question is quite different from do people making these experiments intend to have an economical action? So for the first question, I think is more interesting to me. The question is exactly the one raised by Turing, because he wasn't motivated by economic by selling, because computers were at least not existing, but he was interested in how can science and logical and math can deal with intelligence. And I think this question is very interesting, and the fact that a machine can produce images which are qualified as beautiful by humans is something that is somehow nice. But if you separate, I'm not naive. You cannot separate the motivations with the results, but we could also consider the results as it is, as a product of science. And then on that point of view, being able to even if you're not able to find a metric for aesthetic, because it's somehow silly to say, okay, this is to give a mark to a picture, for example. But what is interesting is that we can produce, even if we are not able to define a metric, and then from that metric to make optimization, to have algorithms that optimize that metric. This is how machine learning works. Even if we're not able to do that, it's quite nice that we are able to produce images which are judged as beautiful, and the way we can quantify this judgment is the Turing test. So it's not I think you confuse the fright, the fear of the economical implication that is legitimate with the powerful of the computation that has been done, which is somehow, I would say, exciting.
No, but like honestly, like it's not really a question of being like frightened or like being excited, because I really do respect the experimentation itself, and I really understand why it was made. But like typically, like the pro who reacted to the picture didn't even say, like, we don't have the words they use to qualify the images, so we don't even know if they found them beautiful. They found them technically equivalent to what a pro would do. So you see that, like, first, this is pretty different than finding it beautiful or to finding it like artistically convincing or as like aesthetically I don't know, revolutionary or something. And it's just that, like, I think Sarah, Jan, sorry, wants to say something. Maybe like I saw you reacting, but it like in the end, it's still language, and it's the language we use, and the way we then how do you say, communicate about the experience. The words we use are important because it conveys a certain idea of what we are doing with this technology. And so, like, what we do in human sciences, and especially about aesthetic, is like to always question how we qualify things. So I think it's more like trying to say that we can both respect how we experiment things, and it's important to know what we aim to these images. Was it beauty for real? As they never gave any definition of what beauty is, or what is aesthetic, or what is artistically, or what is being professional. I find this a bit problematic about how can we judge what was actually the result that been aimed? How can we qualify for real these images? You see what I mean? And it's really not about being frightened, because, for example, like with the Google Studio imagery, like it completely circulates and it has like aesthetic value, and we can completely give aesthetic value to what machine does and be amazed and produce things from them. So it's not like, oh, they have no value and they shouldn't be considered, or oh, they're in danger for culture. It's more about like, how do we all reflect and think the language we put first at the beginning of the experiment, and as well at the end of the experiment, in a way we communicate about the results of the thing, because this is culture. You see?
Sorry, if I may, this is not to interrupt, but I think we'll have time to keep going with the discussion in the roundtable. And meanwhile, we've got other questions in the chat. So there's a question for Rémi. Again, if the person who asked the question wants to ask them on aloud, just cut me in, that's fine. Otherwise, I'm just going to read it out. Rémi, how would you respond to Evgeny Morosov's critique of technological solutionism? In other words, the inclination to think that all human problems can be solved by technological means, not fundamental social, ethical, political decisions.
Well, I think Mr. Morosov brings up a very interesting point, and I hope that the message that you can walk away from my presentation and the answers to the questions that I've made is that I don't think that we can solve everything through technology. That's definitely, I mean, and that would be putting technology in a place where it doesn't belong. And there's a lot of problems. There's problems like that even inherent to the technology that should be solved through societal discussion and decisions, through ethics, through policy. I do think, though, that there are many things we can do with technology. And here I'm looking at my rotating protein structures as an example. This is like drug discovery, disease understanding. These are things that we can't solve through ethics or political decisions. Or, I mean, political decisions will have large impact on how we solve them. But at a scientific level, we can solve them through science and now technology. So I think that there needs to be a fairly clear delineation between the problems, or at least the parts of the problems that we try to solve with technology, and the parts of the problems that we solve through different human interactions. And I mean, that sounds pretty vague, right? But my point is, I think Mr. Morosov is right. We can't solve everything with technology. And even technological advances sometimes come with some problems that we have to solve, that we humans have to solve. But again, this puts the humans back in the center of the picture. We can't rely on machines to solve every problem for us. What we can do is we can leverage machines to help us solve problems and to make sure that we don't create new ones.
Thank you. Other questions from the floor? If not, I have one. Oh, sorry.
I have one. Sorry.
Go on.
It was for Paul Louis. You said that, if I understood you correctly, that there are technologies that help us grow and others that make us shrink. But I was wondering if you consider that there's any way, no matter which technology.
Sorry, at the beginning, I didn't get the first start of your sentence. Would you mind repeating yourself?
Sorry.
Sorry to
I was wondering if I'm going to put the level up. So yes, I was wondering if concerning the technologies that help us grow, if there is not an unavoidable loss of agency no matter what, because I mean, when I'm using my cell phone, I have all the numbers, the phone numbers recorded in it, and therefore I'm unable to remember them by heart as I might have done otherwise. And I was wondering if you consider that there's, to some extent, a loss of agency of human beings, even with the better options, so to speak. So just yeah, is it unavoidable? Or what do you think?
Thanks, Deborah. That's a very good point. I would agree with your thesis that this is unavoidable. I think we've seen this already with every radical innovation, like Rémi mentioned. When you take the printing press or even just writing, we used to remember all of the tales of our tribes. And now we have books, we outsource a lot of our memory to the printed paper or to the handwritten paper. And ultimately, I see this as a trade-off. There are only so many hours in a day. I have only so many days in a life. Do I want to spend them memorizing Shakespeare's work, or do I want to spend them leveraging what I can learn from these bodies of text? But there's no, I would lack humility if I was giving my own success metric there and saying what is a life well lived. And if you look at designers that have been thinking about ethics in technologies, like Tristan Harris and his Center for Humane Technology and his work on time well spent, the metric he advises and that these researchers suggest is, do you feel this technology serves you? In the case of the books, do you feel you're losing more in your memorizing process than you're getting ability to learn from the whole world? And some people will have different trade-offs, and a human who wants their life well spent being all about memorizing poetry will do different tooling choices than myself. I feel here the humanist answer is that we should maximize for the diversity of human destinies so that each individual human can choose what they want their life to be and has the tooling to help them maximize their own desire. And it's going to be, of course, a very diverse answer, because if we have a single way to live a life, we end up in a monoculture, almost fascistic optimization process, where there is only one value, we maximize it to the extreme. And machine learning researchers can tell you that when you maximize for a single value, it can get very extreme.
Thank you very much.
Other questions? If there are no other questions, I have one. And that's for, yes, I guess that's for the engineers in the house. So we had a question about sort of building in a sort of foolproof, yeah, so building in a foolproof sort of dimension into the building it into the tool itself, so that so that they might not be used in a way that would be nefarious to human beings. And I was wondering to what extent you felt in your work that those kinds of foolproof measures were being implemented or put together at the level of your institutions. So when you say, Rémi and Pauline, actually, both of you have been saying, you know, this is our responsibility, this is something for society to be thinking about, this is something that everybody should be sort of taking into their own hands and thinking about. And I was wondering, like, at which level do you feel that that's happening? Is it something that's happening at the intimate level? Are you sort of, is that something that's like for your own conscience to be working on, you know, outside of work or maybe during work? Is it something that you've seen sort of gradually built into the institutions where you're working? Rémi, you were saying that you are now, you know, probably in the company where you're working, you know, people that those ideas of biases and so on are now sort of on the spectrum. And when you've been mentioning Tristan Harris, who is obviously, you know, a design ethicist and sort of created his own position as a design ethicist, and then had to, you know, eventually just quit his job altogether. So that also kind of raises questions, I feel. So I was wondering, you know, yeah, what level do we situate that thing, or should there be a sort of societal level? You know, should there be, I don't know, a sort of observatoire des conséquences de l'innovation technologique or something like that we think of at sort of state level or societal level? How does that work for you?
I mean, I can't speak for DeepMind in general. I can give my personal view of things. What's happening there at DeepMind is that this permeates pretty much every level of the company, in the sense that individual research, it matters to individual researchers. It matters to the leadership. We have processes in place to make sure that we are fully conscious of what we're doing, and we're intentional about doing things where we think we can have positive impact and shying away from things where a negative impact would be possible. And I think, I mean, one of the core values of DeepMind is to be responsible in its pioneering technology. And one thing that we're trying to do is to talk to policy, to talk to regulators, to make sure that they understand the problems that we may or may not be facing, so that this can spark a discussion throughout the whole society, so we can decide what's worth it, what's not worth it, how we want to use things, how we don't want to use things, etc. I think it's something that's very important for the institution itself. And I feel that was also true at INRIA, where I was doing my PhD before, where there were subjects which we did not work on through. I mean, it was a general acknowledgement, but it was also something that was, I mean, we organized seminars, etc. So it was something that was fairly important to pretty much everyone. Yeah.
To add on what Rémi says, indeed, this goes at all levels. Individually, people have their own ethics, and that's something that is a very strong defense against bad applications. At the level of institutions and research lab, it is indeed our structure or the way that we define values that will guide this. However, not everyone will have this responsibility as a core value. I'm running a machine learning study group since a few years, and 2 years ago we were doing a lot of image processing papers, and we could see on our released papers radar that there were a lot of papers arriving for analyzing human pictures to identify if they could be Uyghurs or not, which are an ethnic minority in China. And we saw that there was a lot of publications on this topic of how do you identify people from this minority in automated camera feeds. Even if 99% of the researchers have ethics and have regulations to go in a responsible way, 1% of applications could be dangerous enough already, even bringing existential risks to humanity. And so to second what Rémi here says, it is a pressing matter that we have political decisions made around it. Maybe, as you said, Diane, through an observatory of decisions, but I feel it's time to do more than observe. It's time to be actually intentional and to restrict what can be done with this, or rather to reshape incentives. Once there is no longer an interest to automatically identify ethnic minorities, there is no more risk that this technology is misused. But as long as some actors have an interest in it, like you said earlier, Rémi, regarding foolproof images, it's going to be an arms race as long as people have bad interests.
Thank you so much. Oh, Pauline has a question, and after that, I think so. We'll take one last question, and I think after that, we'll just I'll just open the floor for Sarah. Did you want to say something? Sorry.
Sorry, continue. I was suggesting a short break, like a 3-minute break or something.
Yeah, that was the thing. So we're actually sort of we're moving on to. I see that Jérémy is here with us. So we can actually you know, open this up for a roundtable for which I just want to introduce Hervé and Jérémy so that we all know you know, who each other is basically. But yes, let's take a short break maybe, and then Pauline, if you keep your question in mind, then we'll just you know, have that question after which Hervé can open the round table if you like. Yes, so I'm personally gonna, I think, run down the stairs and find myself a glass of wine. So don't hesitate to do that, or find, you know, any sort of booster, you know, liquid you might like. But yeah, this is all we're going to have in terms of conference drinks. So if you'd like to make this a little bit, you know, a little bit more of a party, then now's the moment. So let's just take, you know, a short break and reconvene at your convenience.
5 minutes, perhaps.
Okay.
Sure. That's great. Thank you.
Hi there. Sorry, there's a fight around the kettle. I had to make my way to it. Okay, who's back?
I think a few of us only.
Yeah, can just wait for a bit. Yeah. Okay, so we're already talking about Trump. I think we should do something of a, you know, an equivalent of the Godwin point with Trump, I think. Just like, Just gonna wait for a bit. Where is Ashley? She's writing into the chat, but not. Oh, Ashley, just activate your video. We want to see your face. Hello. Okay. I think, yeah, so actually we're just gonna wait for Pauline to get back. I know that Rémi had a meeting at 5. The whole Google thing means he's been working from home while watching the kids, which has been interesting apparently. So yeah, it's been months and months of that now. Gonna last for a few months yet. I think they're taking a very conservative approach to lockdown, which means they're just in lockdown for an indeterminate amount of time. Okay, so we've got Sarah back and we've got Pauline back, so I think we can start. Which means I'm just gonna, just to open up this roundtable session, I'm just gonna welcome very quickly Hervé, Frezza-Buet and Jérémy Fix, who are both senior lecturers in computer science at Centrale Supélec, which, as you know, is one of our top engineering schools here in France. Hervé and Jérémy are both members of the BISCUIT research team, which sounds great. And that's the BISCUIT research team at LORIA, that's the Laboratoire Lorrain de Recherche en Informatique et ses applications. And Hervé heads a third-year major specialized in automatic learning. And in terms of research, he's interested in the sort of computer science that you can develop from observing the data processing that takes place in the nervous systems of living things. And Jérémy also teaches some aspects of automatic learning, among which deep learning. And his research deals with the emergent properties of systems made of populations, and he draws from that observation new approaches to calculation. And so these systems that he's observing might be nervous systems, but he's also looking at different kinds of systems, such as chemical systems, social systems, all kinds of such systems. And yes, so just to say, you know, one of our aims for this was to establish some contact or some discussion across the academic divide between STEM and HAS disciplines, so you know, heart sciences and humanities and social sciences. And one of our speakers last week, Jana, was telling us that she works with cybersecurity startups, and she felt that very few of her colleagues were actually really aware of the questions raised by humanities and social sciences as to what it means to be human, who we count as human, what data biases come into our standard definition of the human. And so part of the aim of this roundtable is to ask ourselves what articulations might be found, if any, between the critical work that's being done in the humanities and social sciences and the advances in technology and STEM disciplines that greatly inspire actually this critical work in human sciences and the humanities. Pauline, if you still have your question, can you keep that in mind? And then maybe I'm going to let Hervé sort of do, I think you wanted to, you had a bit of an introduction for that roundtable, Hervé. So if that's the case.
Okay.
How's yours?
Yes, indeed. I listened to the presentation we had this afternoon, and it raises a lot of questions, and maybe it helped me to fix the ideas about what we could maybe share as ideas. And so the point is, as you said, we are computer scientists, but interested in biology and psychology. So we have the experience of sharing ideas with different disciplines, and it's a nice opportunity to share ideas with you. So with you also, it's a thank you for having invited us to this meeting. And so I would like to not sum up, but to expose the ideas I had when that raised in my head when I was listening to your interrogations, and it's just a way to start the discussion. So I'd like to remind all of you something that you may know, that indeed science is we are scientists, not from humanities, or I mean hard scientists, and it means that science is dealing about objects. Like consider physics, it talks about the nature, but the objects in the nature, and the way it deals with objects is mathematics. So this is where we are talking using mathematics to talk about objects, and humanities, as far as I understand them, are talking about what they call in philosophy the subject. I hope it's a good translation, the sujet or philosophy, the subject. I don't know if we call that like this way in philosophy. Sorry,
Subject
the self.
The self. Mm.
Okay, the self. So it's this distinction between the objects and the self, and so humanity is rather talking, including the self in the discussion, and science is rather focusing on objects and describing the nature. And math is the way we describe nature. And the point is that artificial intelligence starts to fuzzy a bit the frontier between the two, because artificial intelligence is a scientific talk. I mean, mathematical talk, computer science, and all this stuff, formalization, that talks about intelligence, artificial intelligence, and it talks not about the, like says Eric, some intelligence that would be compatible with humans, but there's a real motivation for talking about the intelligence of humans, what makes us humans. So the point is that this kind of science addresses more or less explicitly the self as the object of its discipline. So this is where the things became a bit controversial and interesting, as far as I think. So is it, what sense as a science when it does not talk about objects anymore, when it talks about the self? And here, of course, it may somehow be, if not frightening, at least it should raise warnings. And the first of those warnings is the economical interest that we mentioned during this afternoon. And I would keep this apart, because it's a matter of being a citizen and being aware of what science can do for us. And so it's not, I'm not maybe the best person to talk about this, but let's go back to science and the fact that it addresses the self as a scientific object. And here the point is that it works. When you see what artificial intelligence do, somehow works. You can translate, for those who remember what were the first translating systems, now you can talk to your phone and it translates what you said, so it works. And so this is somehow frightening, because when science aims at having as its subject the self, it makes things that work. So it raises many questions, and I think we are the place of humanities is something related to that. So Turing did the same. Alan Turing, as we mentioned, the Turing test during the talk of Pauline, he did the same. He was questioning the artificial, the way, is a machine able of exhibiting intelligence in a so deep way that it can confuse a human. And for him, it was also being able to trick is somehow, is it equivalent? It means that if you're able to trick a machine, to trick a human, to trick all the time a human, are you equivalent to him or he or she? So this is the motivation of artificial intelligence, is to reproduce or to understand what if the human intelligence is mechanic. So the way science proceeds usually is to make a definition and to start from that definition to deal with the concepts. And for artificial intelligence, people try to make a definition of intelligence, and is somehow related to make a definition of humanity. Because of course the intelligence for Sebastian is the intelligence by humans, and we separate humans from animals. Of course we are animals, but we are animals that talk, that think. So the point is the intelligence is a property that is very deeply associated to humanity. So if you try to define intelligence, the question is, do we trying to define humanity? And of course, as soon as you make a definition, you somehow enclose the things by the definition. And for intelligence, this either it is exclusive, you say this is dummy, this is intelligence, and it's a bit abusive, or either you make some strange definition, like you can find people that say what is really intelligent is what a machine cannot do. So, for example, in the 18th century, playing chess was intelligence, and then now that machine play chess, it's not intelligence anymore, just mechanics. The point is that the chess players do not play chess as machines do play chess, but it's not the point. So then, if you consider this as a definition of intelligence, this is negative, what machine cannot do. The further the machine can do more things, you find your intelligence that is confined in the very remaining parts, and we are very we feel safe if we find those parts. As Eric said, machine cannot know that he said a toaster is heavier than I don't remember what it was, a pencil. So then you say, oh, I know how. Yes, I know that a toaster is heavier than a pencil, and the machine still not that. But when it will be able to do this, we'll try to find another place where we are safe to preserve our humanity. So when you try to define intelligence like this, it's not operational. And I like you get it's frightening. And I like what Jacques Lacan said about, because he was also a guy who tried to make a theory, not of mind maybe, but of the psychoanalytic situation. And he says that there's no, en français, il n'y a pas de métalangage, so there's no metalanguage to talk, because he was talking about the analytical experiments, so something very related to the subject, and when he was talking to that, he needs a language to describe it with objects, and then he himself concluded that it's somehow it's not logical. There's no language for talking about the language, the deep experiment of language. And with artificial intelligence, we are in that situation. As soon as we try to encompass the intelligence in a definition, we lead to silly stuff. And this is what science does. And on that point of view, the Turing test is very a nice solution, because you don't have to define things, you just do it. And here comes the difference between the math and the computer science. Because the math, before we had computer, the math describes it's a language of physics, so it describes things. You can set up differential equations to describe the fluids or whatever, but it describes. As soon as you have a computer, you not only describe, you do something, because when you run a computer, it does something by itself. And this is where artificial intelligence comes into the game. It's not only a description of intelligence, it's something that acts. And when you make a program, it runs. and it takes decision. People don't like to hear that, but you can make a program that takes decision as any kind of automat. When if you light up a bomb, it waits, the fire goes into the thread, I don't know, call that, and then it explodes. So it's also a way to defer a decision, if you can say that. But the point is that we have machines now that take decisions, and because it's computer science and not only math. Math describe, and computer science programs run and take decision. And taking decision is not far from creating. And we mentioned in the previous talk the fact that creating aesthetics, the art, deep learning art, and so on, all this stuff, it's addressed the question of creativity by machines. And creativity is not far for just doing things. And when we create, we do things. We have the experience of doing things from ex nihilo, but maybe it's not true. But this is okay. So this is the point. Having being beyond math with computer science is allowing the math, the scientific description, to be creative, in a sense, to do things in the world. And this is the revolution that our discipline, the computer science, brought to the science. So that was my introduction, to say that okay, first we don't have to define intelligence to handle it with science. We only have to create machines, and the science is in the way we create the machine with the program. That this is a formal science, and then machines do their job, and we have the Turing test to evaluate what it does. And the question that I would like to raise for this roundtable is, instead of being afraid or telling, okay, I'm still human there, I need a place for humanities there, the question is, what can the humanities do for that purpose? Because it's a way to investigate what intelligence is in human. It's a scientific way to address it. It's very strange because we address this scientific question without defining it, because you just have to make system run and do the Turing test. So it's even in the field of science, it's somehow strange. But the question is, we get inspired from biology, because you heard about deep learning neural networks. So neural networks is clearly, even if the one in deep learning are far from biological neurons, it's inspired from them. We talk about reinforcement learning, which is inspired from the Skinner box of the rats. So, and we also talk about procedural reasoning and reasoning by different kind of reasoning that are inspired from the psychology. So the point is, from your point of view, rather than asking, is science pushing humanities away from the field of the human knowledge, how could you help us to understand indeed intelligence is what it is? So the point is, let's just understand what it is the best we can, and which could be the contribution of humanities, which are not scientific in a sense, not formal of a formal science. How could humanities help us to investigate that field that is very fascinating? So it's one of the great questions of the history of humans, to understand what is this faculty that we have to be conscious and whatever. And even now that we have the computer science at our disposal, how can humanities help us? So this is the question I will introduce to open the roundtable.
Thank you, Hervé. I think we can probably all sort of unmute our mics at this point, because there's not that many of us that things will interfere. Did anyone want to speak, or should I?
Maybe I would like to add just a few words also as an introduction. So gotcha. I feel less confident than Hervé in discussing philosophy and humanities and so on. I'm more on I would say probably I'm more on the technical side. That's just the way I do. So I would like just to probably answer some of the questions I saw in the talks. So for example, one of at least the way I understand it, I understood it when, for example, Pauline, when she was discussing about art, and the feeling that I had when she was speaking about art is that she thought that there was a requirement for finding a universal definition of beauty or something like this. So like, is it possible to have a universal definition of aesthetics? And my impression is that for the moment, probably the GAN systems that she spoke about, the deep learning networks that are generating artistic things, I do believe that that's possible to produce art with this system. So you have also this example, the painting that has been recently produced by Jan Goodfellow and some others that were sold, I don't remember how many thousand of euros. That's probably for the moment just like an average aesthetic, something that would be pleasant for average number of people. But I mean, if I just get some data, if I could access, for example, the likes you do on the web, if I could access the pictures you are liking and you are looking with your search engine, I could probably produce something that is not universal, but that you will like. So I can probably customize my deep learning model, but I can probably train a neural network to go from something that would please to most of the people to something that would please just to you, because I know exactly what you like. I know exactly what you're looking for. And so I think we can really now, with this big amount of data that we are freely giving, we can really customize these networks. So I'm not sure that we need to, I'm not sure that there is an answer to, is there a universal definition of aesthetics, but I mean, I can nevertheless produce something that you will like, and I will customize the aesthetic for every single people. And also I had the feeling that sometimes there was the question of what can machines do and what they can't do. So my hypothesis in my research work is that machines can do everything that we do as humans. And I try to mechanize, to understand all this computational things that we do with our brains and really to translate this with in silico. So, and I don't believe, but that's a belief. I don't believe in soul. I don't believe in all these things. I just think that we are, as humans, just machines in the sense that we are biological substrates that process information, and I want to understand how we process information, and I try to understand these principles. So from this hypothesis, I'm not sure that there is anything that a machine cannot do. So that's that's just and I also think that I'm also not necessarily convinced that the human brain is the only thing that we can tag as intelligent. So as you said in the introduction, I'm interested in, and Hervé as well, we are interested in emergent principles, so emergent things that get out from a large population of entities. So if you consider a brain is millions of neurons that are interconnected, and what is getting out from this huge circuit of interconnected neurons is myself speaking and moving my hands around and probably thinking about what I'm going to cook this evening. No, not yet, but so all these things are, from my point of view, an emergent property of the work of individual neurons. But if you have a look around and if you see the birds, for example, the flocking of birds, these behaviors, I consider them as well as emergent properties of the interaction of individuals that are birds. But you know, these, you see what I mean about that, these flocking behaviors, they somehow dance these birds in a very nice way, like if it was coordinated, but we can exhibit systems with just local interactions with individuals and produce, as a result, at the level of the population, that nice dance of birds. And I could also mention, for example, another system that you may not consider as intelligent, which is the Physarum polycephalum. I don't know if you know this. That's a slime mold. So really a strange thing, but in some ways we can really consider that it's behaving in not a random way. So it's really expanding in some directions in order to grab some sugar, for example, to get healthy. And this is also what I would consider to be intelligence, but even if it's just a single cell that it's expanding, I would also consider this as intelligence. So maybe also, I mean, I am somehow, in some respect, if I go back to machine learning, I am somehow terrified by what we can do with machine learning, because in my mind, we can just do everything. So you can, for example, you know, these deep fakes, you can generate, I mean, you mentioned aesthetics, you mentioned generated painting. So we can generate images that look very natural. We can generate faces of people that look natural, but these people don't exist. There is a website on this where you can even take a network and generate faces of people that don't exist. You can even take some videos and tweak the movement of the mouth so as to produce the movement that is coherent with a speech. So I think it's really terrifying in the because we can do all these huge things. So at the end, I'm wondering about how we can, I mean, how we can, I don't know if I should say that I consider that the law should somehow limit what we allow these people to do, but, and I don't know if I'm going too far, if I'm considering that machine learning can be also considered in some way as a weapon that we should probably regulate in some ways, but I think we should not, definitely we should not consider that machines, there are things that they cannot do. I mean, we should keep in mind, start from the hypothesis that they can do everything. It's just a matter, currently it's just a matter of data. It's just a matter of computational power. But I don't think that we should start with, okay, machines, there are things that cannot do. Suppose we start with machines can do everything. The next question is, so should we prevent them from doing something? That would be my little word.
Thank you, Jérémy. I think the great thing here is that, you know, you seem to be speaking from, you know, you're working on similar things and you seem to be speaking from completely different perspectives, with, you know, one of you sounding super kind of sanguine, that's kind of optimist, kind of, you know, not nervous, basically saying, you know, Hervé's like, why, like, let's not be afraid of this, and just kind of, you know, find solutions and find how we can sort of collaborate to make this safe for everybody. And Jérémy being like, yeah, it's still kind of scary, actually. So that, and that's, I think that's interesting for us, partly because it's, one of the things is we, you know, as people working in the humanities, it's very hard to know to what extent people who produce technology really have these things in mind, these kind of big questions, or, you know, to what extent they think about those things, or to what extent they just, you know, there's the maths and there's the, you know, there's the algorithms, and you just, you know, you've got your tools, you work on your tools, and that's it. And at the end of the day, you know, that's what you do in your job, and you have to compartmentalize. And then there's the rest of your life where you're, you know, a human being and a citizen and possibly a father, possibly a brother, possibly, you know, all these things. And I think, yeah, I think for us, because we're sort of thinking from the other side of that, you know, we don't understand the technicality of it. Most of what we see of it is, you know, fiction. And also, you know, we hear, I mean, I don't know about, you know, Sarah and Pauline, but I feel that the general public, we see things such as, you know, the appeal that was signed by, you know, very visible scientists, sort of, you know, star scientists, you know, people like Stephen Hawking and so on, who are like, okay, we should really be careful about what we're creating right now, because we're sort of playing with fire. And I think for us, it's hard to sort of really, yeah, know to what extent these things are taken into account within the fields of hard sciences, and to what extent people are just, you know, working on developing things without really necessarily anticipating on the consequences.
Yes, yeah, I'd like to react. The point is that don't believe that we are better citizens than you according to those points. I mean, we are somehow have good technical skills, good scientific skills to address the problem in a scientific way, but the danger that you're afraid of is a matter of collective decisions. And this is what Paul Louis, I think, said. It's a matter of being able, as a group of citizens, all equal to influence on the choices that we want as collectively. And the risk is to consider that scientists or the guys who are deeply in the techniques are more, I would say, more aware than the others on what these options should be. The point is that we are aware, maybe more than you, about technical stuff. We can tell you for the moment that it's only a matter of computing matrices or whatever to see the effects on deep learning that are show what also Eric said. But the point is, for example, for nuclear power plants, I'm not a physician. About the atoms, I don't really know that. I'm not sure that it's safe. They play with huge amounts of energy. I'm not sure more than you that it's safe, but I think we can all discuss about we can all be presented the risks by people who know, and make the right choice independently from economical interests. And for the way I'm optimistic is that I don't consider that this it sounds magic because we reproduce intelligence and it has a huge power of computation. But the problem that we have to face in terms of common choice of the society is really similar to the one that we had to face when we decided to bet on the fossil energies for our development. We are killing the planet because of this, and it's far more dangerous than what we did so far with the artificial intelligence. Even if Google and Facebook can enter your mind, of course it's true, but compare, people are not so afraid of the fact that they are using a car every day than the fact that they are using Google every day. And for the moment, it's much more dangerous to use I don't say Google is not dangerous, but I say that the problem of wondering about Google is very similar to the problem of wondering about using your car. So it's a matter of being aware of the technology that we have. As scientists, I think we are not responsible of the use. As soon as we don't work in the dark side, we don't telling people we are working in the public system, so we make publications. Scientific journalists can communicate about what we are doing, and we are willing to communicate. So from that point, we are, as every other citizen, able to make choice, to take our part of the choice that we should all make. I think this is what Paul Louis said as well. So the point is that don't let it's true for artificial intelligence, it's true for nuclear plants, it's true for everything. We don't have to let the specialists decide because they are specialists, and it's, they have to make the decision available to all of us.
Thank you for reading all those points. Like, if I can intervene, like many things actually are coming to my mind. First, that like with what to start. Like, I completely understand what you're actually saying, Hervé, about like scientists are sometimes also far away from how it evolved in the society, because you have like many departments as well that.
Sorry, I didn't get the.
Sorry. Like,
sound issues, sorry.
The issue is that what do we do with technology today? And what we all are today is like all researchers in a way, all scientists, and we are sharing all knowledge. And sometimes we are far away of the responsibility of the use of one technology. What you're saying is that you are a scientist and you are building up this artifact, but you're far away of how the use is managed and shared and spread in the society. And because we know that
I'm not far away. I'm as far away as you as a citizen.
Yes, which is pretty far away in a way, because you
not that much.
Like I'm speaking like from my standpoint, actually, like it's been years I'm sharing as well with IT that are working in such big companies as Google, and that used to be IT and now are more in the marketing side of it. And and they're actually now pretty far away from the scientific part of it. And I see that how they talk about that and how they raise the issues by this technology is completely different. And so like, I think what we are facing today is that different languages, different competencies that are completely dislocated and that don't communicate together. And what is really rich today is that we have the ability to finally, like seriously, finally, like it's been 10 years I'm working on new media digital things, and I've never been really able to talk with an IT engineer in a scientific, in a research context, because like we are so separated. Not saying that like I've reached to some IT, to some engineer and things, but like, I mean, in a collective context, it's the first time in many years. And this is really important because actually we are working with the same objects. You were saying that human sciences are only working with subject. Actually, like I might be in a discipline, but my scientific background is a bit different, as I'm coming from semiotic, more like media studies. And we're like, I actually working only on objects. Like I never work with humans. Actually, I'm just working with optical devices, with medias, with program and things, but just from a different point of view. That means that I have no mathematical language, I have no computational competencies, even though I'm interested in those languages. And semiotic historically has a huge background because some of the most well-known semioticians, for example, are mathematicians. And today, sorry, my cat is coming, in so many publications.
My dog is barking as well, so there's some communicating in some strange dimension, I don't know.
And I think what you raised about like artificial intelligence is that suddenly what semiotician used to do with mathematician is today very important, because it used to be like, what do we do with knowledge? How do we formalize knowledge and how do we code that? And so maybe there is like a first step here of like, what can we do with what can you do with humanities today, is that we've all been working on formalization of knowledge in a way from different perspectives. And we have some common historical background on the way this discipline's been built, let's say it this way. And the second side is that on on the biological side, more on the biology field, and I think Sarah and Diane can completely complete about that, but like we completely saw a change coming from some researchers such as Donna Haraway and Tim Ingold, that are basically that are former biologists that progressively turn their practice into anthropology, saying that they can be biologists but having anthropological concerns. So that means that they decided to change the model they use to interpret their objects, their research objects. That means that from like, for example, in the case of Donna Haraway, she will more consider it as like, she wouldn't use like rhizome, but the idea is that like a more complexical form of a shim to understand how biology works and how intelligence and relations to the other works. For Ingold, for example, it would be atmosphere more than depth. And I don't know if I'm really clear on that, but that means that some scientists from the biological field decided to widen the way they would consider the elements together and how they work together. That means as well to understand intelligence as something different from a very computational perspective in a way. And like another gap, and then I will completely, like, it's really just to open the conversation. But the philosopher Catherine Malabou, she's really interested into what neuronal research been opening as a field for philosophy in general, and on the idea of plasticity. And so typically she's really not technophobic or anything, and she's really considering what the last research in neuronal networks been raising as a question of creativity, of intelligence and plasticity as something really far away from le QI, IQ, like in intelligence as something you measure, of like more like different shape of intelligence. So I think these are like things that are like questioning like strictly this question without like saying like, oh, we are frightened or everything, but more like, oh, can we think differently to the same question from different perspective? I don't know. Like that.
Yes, I'd like to react. First of all, of course, there are relations between the different disciplines, and sometimes they are abusive. For example, from a field I know, the computational neuroscience, the way you make a paper in computational neuroscience is to describe the brain with a formalism that comes from computer science. And sometimes it's very abusive. They say, okay, we have reinforcement learning stuff with mathematical elements in it, and they say, okay, I can see that in the brain. So then I make papers, I make math on this, and I put curves, and it means just nothing. So the point is that sometimes some, let's say, some less formal disciplines. I don't know if it's the case of the one you mentioned, but sometimes some disciplines like biology of the brain is not that formal. they make experiments, but the point is it's not you don't have a theory that can predict experiments, and then you can check the experiments as we do in physics. You don't have this when you're playing with the brain of animals. But then, in order to be serious, to produce curves, to produce models, they somehow they are abusive on the formalism. And the point is that with the H index and all this stuff, in order to be to get credits, to get scientific, to be recognized by your peers, you need to add science, this kind of science, in your publication. So I would say that the best way to be open to the others and to collaborate is to let's say to keep the way you're working. For example, I like psychoanalysis. It helps me for, I feel inspiration from it, because when I consider the processors, it talks to me. But the point, I won't ask the psychoanalyst to formalize their work in order to get inspired. And I think it could be the same for the other. When I present my work to biologists, for example, when I was young, and maybe Jérémy has also had these experiments, we said, okay, I have a model of the cortex. I go to see them and say, okay, guys, this is the model of the cerebral cortex that I have built. It had 16 neurons, 16 units, and they were laughing at us very because they say, hey, guys, you're kidding. But we were very proud of our models. So we say, hey, guys, this is, and of course they were laughing at us. Then, so this was a bad way to do it, as it is bad to add extra formalism to a science that is not formal. Then I change the way I communicate with them. I say, okay, guys, I'm playing with this kind of models. Look at the way they activate, the way they self-organize, the way they make collective decisions. The model that I'm working on, they are computer models, and this is the way I play with them. And then they say, it's like the brain. So I think it's more efficient to share this interest for understanding somehow the humanities, because even in the field of computer science, we try to understand what humans are. So it's the better way to share this point of view, and then to keep to stay where we are, because it's we make interesting studies with our own paradigms, because we are sharing the same objective. And when people somehow think, and we did the mistake, that it's in order to meet others, you have to resemble, to try to be similar to them. And it's in this context of multidisciplinarity, I think this doesn't really work, because we inspire from biology, neural networks are inspired from biology, and the point is that biology should now consider what is computer science, what is the different kind of evaluation that we have, asynchronous or dynamical system and so on, to get feed on their own field. And this, I think it's the same. I'm not less comfortable with that because I don't have the experiment, but I think it's the same with all the humanities. It could be good that you're not afraid, if you are, but don't say you are, but that you're willing to learn a bit about, this is what you did, Pauline, but to learn a bit about what is computing. If you want to talk with computer scientists, you have to know what computing means, and even a bit theoretically, and then you will feel the connections by yourself. And for the moment, I think that some people, you mentioned people which are technophobic or whatever, this is not a good way to address it. Be open to some people that has the same motivation as every humans to understand how come that we are conscious, let's say, to say, they all have the same question and they address it in different ways. It should be enough to share ideas, but don't feel afraid to make by your own some steps in the field of the others.
Thank you, Hervé. I actually had two questions to ask, and one was actually so in response to what you said to start with, Hervé, about just asking ourselves how, or you asking us how we can help you. And I thought that's interesting because that was the question I wanted to ask. Like, I think one of the things we ask ourselves as humanities people, we tend to, I think a lot of our life is like this. People think what we do doesn't have any purpose at all, doesn't serve any purpose at all, because anybody can think about philosophical things or try and learn languages, or I think because what we do is less technical, there's much more of a sense that it's widely shared. And I think, it's a great pleasure for us to hear you speak and to have you, mention Freud and Lacan and, all kinds of fields of that we would think of as pertaining to the humanities and social sciences. Paul-Louis was mentioning Spinoza and so on, and Greek philosophy. And so clearly, these are the things that we share. And I think part of the dissymmetry is that we kind of tend to feel that we're working on those things that everybody shares. And then you have, on top of that, you've got the technical know-how. And so you have a little bit more of an idea of what you're talking about. And clearly we have no idea. Then our question, I think, or my question as someone who's interested in those things, but clearly, realizes their own limitations. I have big limitations when it comes to actually understanding the practical stuff, the technical stuff. What I usually ask myself is how can I play a part in this, in maybe regulating those things, so possibly regulating if we are to regulate, or just in thinking about asking those big questions, thinking about those possible issues, raising awareness when it comes to bias, for instance. Rémi was mentioning, so Rémi mentioned history earlier, and then you used philosophy and so on. I was wondering if there's a way in which, yes, possibly engineers or engineering scientists, might give us humanities people sort of pointers as to where they need for our thinking to go, where we can actually sort of, because we are thinking of those things all day and you don't have all day to think about those things. So, are there any way in which we can make that collaboration more productive, so that you ask ourselves the questions that you need kind of thinking around and solving. So that's my question for you. And then Paul-Louis, I had another, so my other question was, it's actually for both of you, because Hervé, you said, one of the things is as a scientist, if you work in the public system, you're putting things, in the public system, everything is open, and that's where you're doing your duty as a citizen, right? And I think part of the question we're asking is, well, clearly not all research, and that's not all research, not all scientific research is done within that framework, right? And that was partly the reason why I invited sort of 2 engineers working in the private sector today, and then 2 engineers sort of working in the public sector, because not that I want, I don't, Paul-Louis, like, do you not feel you have to say anything that might get you into trouble? But even in just talking to you all and dealing with you all, I know that, in talking with Rémi, there were a lot of things that he had to check with his hierarchy when it came to, the presentation that he was going to make, whether, everybody was completely fine with this being recorded, and Rémi I felt there was much more of a, he had to check more, and my impression is that this is something that you would experience more as someone working in the private sector, that you're dealing with, obviously your company owns your work, if I understand correctly, and I think that's part of the question. Because, so I guess at the end of the day, the sort of big question would be, well, so should we, force companies to, put into the public domain as much as possible? But also, even when we think of the public domain, military uses of technology, that has to do with, nation states and how nation states are going to deal with how they're going to use the technology, basically. So it's not actually a solution in itself. Thinking of the nation state, I think, is something a little bit it's quite French, you know, if it's public, if it's, you know, nationally, if it's nationalized in some way, that's good, it will be fine. But it's not always necessarily the case. So I'm going to shut up now, but those were my two sort of questions.
Okay, I try to answer the question why I still have it there in mind, because you make very long questions. And not easy. So the first was about what you could do for us, I think. And the point is that even in our field, in the science domain, we don't want to work with you because you don't bring money. This is a point that people consider that the humanities do not really worth it because they are not in the place for bringing money. And as researchers in artificial intelligence, we have I'm doing useless research. Nobody can make money with my research, but as I'm in the field of artificial intelligence, it's okay for me, it's cool. So it's not fair, I admit, but the point is that if you want to meet the community of the computer scientists that are engaged in artificial intelligence, you will face this difficulty, not with us, because we like working with a pluridisciplinary approach, but you have to know that you're not serious because you don't bring money. It's unfair, but it's like this, and you may experiment that in your labs when you get for fundings every day. I know that. So this is the first barrier, is to say, okay, find the people who don't care about the money, to identify them, because even between our colleagues, if we are talking about humanities, they say, okay, this is we don't really care. It's for not forward, but it's not serious science, and we don't care. So you have first to identify the people, and then meet together would be a good way to just have fun to discuss those ideas, and then it will bring areas where we can find where we can help from each other. And as a scientist, I have the experiment of being inspired from biology and from psychology, and it helps to do my useless stuff. So that's it. This is I think we share this kind of property, even if the humanities, you have people who are caring, others like psychiatrists, psychoanalysts, and all those guys. But in research, we are useless. So this is the answer to the first question. Identify the people who won't reject you, because you will find some. The second question is about the fact that doing open science is enough for I don't remember, for ensuring the exchange with everybody. I'm not sure if I will answer, but of course, being public changes the deal, because we aim at, we are funded by the public system, so we aim at doing open source on all this stuff. But the point, there's another limit, that is, some people said, and I will take the example of transgenic technology. Some people say, don't replace God, or don't play with nature as far as, because you're playing with dangerous things, trying to mimic the intelligence leads to, as when you play with genetics, you play with the roots of the nature. And I would say that the point of science is to understand nature. We have to understand the world. And this is why I say we're not responsible for this. Our goal is not to exploit the world in some direction, is to understand nature. So it's just curiosity, how does nature works? So when you investigate on atoms, you understand what atoms, how they contain energy, and you can make, of course, a bomb from it, or a nuclear plant. Maybe both are bad things, I don't know. But the point is, you have a lot of money that is spent on exploring the universe, with the black holes. It has no utility at all. But people, gives me hope that the humanity spends a lot of money, a lot of work to just understand nature. And this is a philosophical question. Do the time starts with the Big Bang? And it's a very philosophical question that nobody will use it for making money. So there's still a place for that in our world. So this is nice. And we are on that side. And this is why I said we are not responsible for what we will find. We find nothing, so it's cool. But the point is that the purpose of science, the science is not motivated by economics. That is just the science we can in a society can offer to have, just to, as for the astronomy, we have it's a luxury. We have enough money from our activity to be gifted of this useless science, just to understand the world. And this is where I think I'm working. So it's I appreciate that. And I would say that understanding the world not makes you responsible of what you will find, because you're not motivated by the application. And this is somehow different from the guys in the private system, because they are funded by, that doesn't mean that they do bad things or whatever, but the basics are not the same at the beginning. I don't know if this answers the question.
Side, but
Sorry?
Also, I'd like to share the perspective from the private side, but maybe also first a rebuttal to this argument that because it's public, you're not responsible. If you build a button that anyone can press to end the world, and you say, I just built it to see how it goes, are you responsible if a kid can press it without understanding the consequences? This is how I see AI research today. We are going to build systems that can have tremendous impact on our lives. And just the fact we do it for understanding doesn't absolve us, at least I believe, from the responsibility of the consequences.
But, yes, but if I take, excuse me, but if I take the decision not to doing it, I have a decision on the science, on the evolution of humanity that I can take on my own without the democratic process. So
I'm not saying it's a good thing, but that's where we are today. So there is some individual responsibility in doing it or not. It's, you know, back to what Diane was saying earlier. How do you know you're playing with fire? How did Marie Curie know that she was poisoning herself as she was studying radiations? Did Eisenhower know the consequences of his work? Do the current industries know what the human future of us being brainwashed into entertainment would look like? I find WALL-E more and more a likely depiction of what our future might be. And I'm not sure that any individual industry worker here is aware that they're building this future. No, they have an excuse, they're doing it for money, while a public researcher would be only doing it for knowledge. So I could spin this on saying that actually the private person has less responsibility, they just have to feed themselves. The public researcher chooses on their own where they study. And so they are responsible of the output more to some extent than the worker.
They feel shareholders rather than themselves. Don't forget that.
No, that's interesting, because the individual actor in the economical system might not be the decision maker. And that's come back to what are the incentives to our decisions. So Diane, you were asking, how can humanities help? In a broader way, like you said, you're already helping. You saw us, Rémi and myself, leveraging a lot of humanities concepts in our current presentations. And to me, the first way humanities can help is by bringing understanding, taking steps back, thinking slow, things that technical experts are less often doing. This being said, I don't think that's the main missing thing from humanities today, because you're doing it for centuries, understanding the world and publishing things on it. What I think non-technical experts can bring to this topic today is the sense of urgency that experts cannot communicate. When I say that AIs and algorithm ruling the world is a danger, people dismiss it as a nerd thing. But when people from humanities say it, your voice resonates a lot more with the general public. And I think here we're past the point where experts bring something to the table. It's a moment where all humans should be worried, or at least should be careful about this. And you're in a better way, in a better place to communicate this than we are. Then the second question on research being public and private. I think today, the main issue, like you said, Hervé, is that the incentives of public and private are not the same. And that today, we have, in the public space, incentives to understand the world, whereas in the private world, we are incentivized by our quarterly returns in the next quarter. And that brings a very different kind of incentive. But that doesn't mean that we cannot solve the problems of these industries. And I would like to see today computer science being looked at the same way we look at medical technologies. At least in France, when you want to release a new medicament, a new cure, you have to prove how it works. You have to show the internals. You have to show a huge body of research on its impact on people, including on people different than you. It's not only testing it on white, young, cis males, it's testing it on a representative sample of humanity. and seeing if it improves their lives or not. What would it be if we judge Google Translate and its impact on the world against the whole humanity's interest and not just against Silicon Valley's? And I think if we look at AI like we look at medtech or at any kind of crucial industry, we can find solutions to solve these perverse incentives. So the private world just cares about money, but maybe we can hit them where it helps.
Thanks. That's actually very encouraging. I will take that. I think I'm probably on the side of Hervé on that thing of the general public sort of believing us. I don't think anyone in the general public sort of believes us or really cares what we say in the humanities. But thank you for that. That's it is very encouraging. It's a very encouraging thing to say to hear. I think I'm gonna have to let you go because it's getting late. But I've had, if that's at all possible, if you just want to leave, you can do that. But I had one last thing to ask, and maybe that's that I feel sort of ties in with what you were just saying when you mentioned Wall-E, and I thought that yeah, and Hervé, you were talking about the fact that we in the humanities work on the subject, but actually our objects are cultural objects, right? And some of those are fictions. And so I was wondering to what extent you felt you could relate to those questions that we might ask in the humanities via those objects. Like how do you, when you watch Wall-E, or I mean, do you watch Wall-E? Would you watch Wall-E? Would you watch or read fiction that has to do with those big questions, with, you know, asking about the future of technology? And if you,
I don't understand. Wall-E, the robot?
I mean, would you read sci-fi? Do you feel that those stories, because we tend to comment on the stories, but obviously the other side of that is the people telling the stories, right? Imagining what could become of humanity, you know, sci-fi and you know, dystopias and so on. Like, do you guys watch those things or relate to those things? Do they are they a way in which you can sort of imaginatively relate to your work, or are they just, you know, silly stories in your?
I would say yes, with a catch, because we need to tell ourselves stories and to project in the future and see what could be enjoyable or less enjoyable futures. Mm-hmm. And it's very useful to have this body of people imagining what future could be. When you read like science fiction from the 60s, it's impressive to see like the body of collective imagination that has been transcribed into literature. But this being said, the problem is that it's not a good way to assess realistic outcomes. This is something Elisor Yudkowsky describes as the curse of Terminator, which is that people imagine AIs taking over the world as mostly armed robot, very like muscle that's going to come and kill everyone. And this is a lot less likely than various others AIs transforming everything into paperclips because we told them to maximize the number of paperclips in our world, something like this. So Elisor Yudkowsky ties this to the, I'm not sure of the name, but it's a psychological and statistical paradox where when you add details to a story, it seems more realistic, while statistically it has less power. I remember this study on American biases where you tell a story about someone who has stolen a wallet and doesn't return it. Like the small paragraph describes a bad behavior. And then the question is said, how likely do you think this person is a teacher? And maybe people say, okay, 20%, unlikely a bad person is a teacher. And then we ask something very biased. In the US, it was, how likely do you think this person is a teacher and is Muslim? And the likeliness people report was higher. It seems more realistic that it's a Muslim person because I have my own biases against Muslim people. But mathematically, if there is the probability that someone is Muslim, the probability that someone is a teacher, the probability that someone is both Muslim and a teacher can only be lower. And yet, psychologically, people attribute a higher likeliness to this story. So the futurism and giving a lot of details on what future can be is very seducing, according to Elisa Rutkowski, because it gives us a credible perspective on the future. But the fact it sounds credible makes it almost impossible to arrive. There are so many details that at least 20% of it will be wrong. So it's a good start to read science fiction, but it would be very dangerous to stop there as an assessment of what can be.
I would add that, of course, science fiction is not prediction, but to go back to artists, when you see the guys making the stories of Black Mirror, for example, those guys are artists. They're aware of science, of course, but they are mainly creatives, artists, far from what I'm able to do. And they don't predict the future, but they ask questions. And this is what science fiction is doing. It raises questions. For example, they have never predicted internet. In the old series of science fiction, you never see internet. The best you see is a visiophone or this kind of stuff. But the point is that you mentioned the fourth dimension series, and they just raise good questions so that we think differently. And this is what humanities can bring to us. Just say, oh guys, wait a bit. This raises some other question that you're not used to raise. So I would say that. On this kind of considering the consequences of what I'm doing, I would need humanities, because they step back from the technology and says, hey, they're still clever, and ask and are able to. This is why the series are very fascinating even to the scientists, because it allows it raises warnings, and it helps to get mature about the choices that implies what we are doing.
Yeah. Great. Jérémy, did you want to say something?
Yeah, maybe another point maybe where humanities can help us is also you have an understanding of how the population would react to things. So I think you can probably think about, imagine that tomorrow we have such or such technical possibilities, and suppose that it exists. Then you could probably think about how all these populations would suddenly react. So all these collection of individuals due to such and such, I don't know if they are small, large groups and so on, how would the information propagate? How could you possibly stop from, I'm thinking again about these fake news, but how can, if suddenly there is a critical amount of individuals that are believing into these fake news, and what's going on, it is suddenly propagating at a higher speed. So I think you also have this understanding of how the societies are organized, and how the information propagate within these societies. So I think you can also say something about how we should protect us as societies to be more, how do we say, resilient, or to be able to absorb these possible issues.
Yeah, these shocks that new technologies create. I think what's really interesting in what you're suggesting there is that we sort of we're sort of coming back to, well, if the potential problem in all of this are not the machines themselves or the technology itself, but always, the humans and how humans are going to respond, then knowing humans and how humans react to things, and the bad things that they might do and the bad ideas that they might get from new technologies, that does sound like a useful thing to keep in our toolkit. Definitely. Pauline, did you want to say something?
Tiny things about that is that, like, it's really encouraging to hear that about humanities, but the question that I might have, and maybe it's not the time right now to answer, but it's just that in humanities right now we are considering that all the quantitative studies we could do about, like, what do people think, are not the best way sometimes to understand the issues we are facing. And so, like, one of the questions I think we could address for another time, another talk together, I think, is that, would you, like, would science, natural science and computational science be ready to hear humanities when they are not speaking with huge metrics, saying that 90% of the population are saying that? because the thing is that like there is really a huge gap in the way those humanities are made, and that we've been dealing with the problem that we don't address the problem the same way. And if we really want to build like critical new futures, like we have to drop for a while this idea of like a quantitative metric that say that people want that. Not saying that we have to judge for the whole group, but that it's a way to produce science, and maybe like to try to be experimental altogether, because we need this time of like being speculative altogether in a way. And I think that might be one of the issues we are all facing, and I'm personally really willing to discuss all those questions in the time all together, because I think it's really important and cannot be like resolved in the one afternoon, even though it was fascinating to have this possibility to discuss all that together. Yeah, I at this point.
Thank you, Pauline. I think that was a very, very nice way of sort of rounding this up, because yeah, it is definitely one of those. I think we're all sort of trying to think of ways in which our disciplines are evolving, and we need to sort of it's hard to find, you know, where to put that cursor, you know, how much to get into, you know, new methodologies, and how much to keep from more traditional approaches, maybe from our fields. That said, I think I'm gonna thank you all for you know, being part of this, for attending this afternoon. I can't speak for everybody, but I had a great time, and I think a lot of people actually just thanked everybody before they signed off, and I think a lot of people would agree that we had a very fruitful, very stimulating discussion, which is always what we want from these things. So I will, just thank you all. Wish you a great weekend, and formally close this part of this part of the.
Thank you for having invited us. It was a very interesting experience.
Of course,
thank you very much.
Of course, it was wonderful. It's wonderful to be able to work with colleagues.
Thank you very much.
Bye, bye, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you again for organizing. It was a pleasure.
Sure.
And disregard my direct message. It was to Jérémy, so I'm going to ask him.
Don't worry about it. Yeah.
Thanks again. Have a great weekend.
You too.
Hope
Bye.
to see you again soon.